Hey everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast, episode 46, this week with Black Dog LED. Thanks for joining us. We do this podcast every week to help promote both aquaponic and cannabis growing, as well as vegetables and all different kinds of stuff. We really touch on a wide variety of things. So this week we have Black Dog with us. They make some of the best LEDs out there as far as the higher end market goes. I sold a whole bunch of them when I used to work back at the Aquaponic source, and they were kind enough to join us today and tell us all about their lights and how they are different from some of the others on the market. So thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Certainly, happy to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Black Dog and what you guys do?
Yeah, Black Dog's been around for about 7 years now. We've specialized only in LED grow lights. And our secret sauce, as it is incredible intensity of light as well as ultraviolet in the spectrum. So we're one of the very few LED grow lights out there actually has ultraviolet in the spectrum. And we also sell the two largest LED grow lights on the planet, our 800 and 1,000 watt actual pole LED grow lights, which actually match a 1,000 watt high pressure sodium double-ended fixture, as well as a 1,200 watt double-ended fixture. So that's when you dial it up to 12. So we can create the same amount of photons and deliver them to your plants as a 1,200 watt HID double-ended fixture with 200 less watts. We can save you 20% on your electric bill up front and significant more on the back end with cooling costs.
Awesome. So what differentiates your stuff from some of the other LEDs out there? I know that you guys have IR and UVAB in your stuff. Do you want to talk more about some of the different, what separates your stuff from some of the others? And I noticed one of the other questions that we got when we posted this, this announcing that you're going to be on the show is, what you guys, your LEDs are very different colors, and some of the other ones are solid. Do you want to explain the difference between the two and the methodology between them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a very large difference between LED technology and other lighting technology in that with LEDs, we get to really choose exactly what colors that we want to create. With HID type lights, you're heating a gas up and putting an electric arc through it until it glows and gives off a particular kind of light, but you can only control what color of light you're getting to a limited extent there. So high pressure sodium lights were initially used as parking lot lights and warehouse lights, and they work great for that because the sodium at high pressure happens to give out light which happens to be right in the peak of the human visual spectrum. So they are arguably among the most efficient lights available to create light for human eyes. And if you bombard plants with enough light, you can get them to grow no matter what kind of light it is, as long as it has a decent spectrum to it. But one of my favorite examples to use is low pressure sodium light. And low pressure sodium light isn't even used in parking lots or warehouses because it only creates one spectrum of light, and that's the emission lines of sodium. And it's a very, very efficient light. It's actually more efficient than high pressure sodium by far. It's more efficient than any LED on the planet by far at this point. But there's a reason no one ever grows with it, and that's because only giving off yellow photons, plants actually die underneath it. You can't grow anything with it. So it's very important to have a broad enough spectrum that you grow plants. And high pressure sodium has been the most efficient way to deliver that for a very long time until LEDs came along. But unlike high pressure sodium, where one bulb is more or less the same as another, with minor differences here and there, including in terms of spectrum and efficiency, with LEDs, we get to pick and choose exactly what we want. And that allows us to provide exactly the spectrum that we want to provide the plants or humans or anything with LEDs. So unlike high pressure sodium, where one light is more or less the same as any other, with LEDs, there's a huge variety on the market of different kinds of LED grow lights with different spectrums and different options available. So what really separates Black Dog LED is we specifically design our spectrum to be efficient for growing plants as opposed to being efficient for creating light that human eyes can really see. Human eyes are best at seeing light in the yellow and green area of the spectrum, and that's really not a coincidence. Our eyes evolved to see the colors of light that plants don't use, because that allows our eyes to see the difference between the tree and the fruit that's ripe in the tree that we want to pick, as well as the tree and the tiger in the forest that might be hiding there to eat us. So with LEDs, we can tune the spectrum to be what humans want, and that's what a lot of these single color LEDs that you had mentioned do. And they're actually getting slightly more efficient than high pressure sodium at this point in terms of creating light that is great for human eyes, and that's great for parking lots and warehouses, but it's still not great for plants. You can grow plants with it. If you bombard them with enough light, plants will grow with almost any light as long as it has a broad enough spectrum. But you really need to give plants exactly the light they want in order to grow them to their maximum potential. And plants have evolved over time to use primarily blue and red light in chlorophyll. That's what they mostly want. That's what they're most efficient at using. And that's where we actually concentrate our spectrum. So we have everything from ultraviolet through infrared. It's a complete full spectrum. It's actually arguably more full than a lot of lights on the market that claim to be full spectrum, because we have everything from about 360 nanometers through 750 nanometers in the spectrum. But we target and specifically have a lot more in the blue, especially the deep blue and UV area of the spectrum, as well as the red area of the spectrum. And that makes it a lot more efficient for plants. And we see that efficiency in a number of ways, not only increased yield per watt with our lights, but also because we're using light colors that plants can efficiently use, we're not actually heating the leaves of the plants up as much as you would with a high pressure sodium, or even a single color LED that's designed for human use, the so-called white or broad spectrum LEDs. And because of that, we actually need to increase the temperature of the growing area by about 10 degrees, because we're keeping the leaves so cool with the efficient light that we're giving them, that you actually need to raise the temperature in the growing room to keep the leaves at their optimal metabolic temperature.
And that also plays a big role in stuff like VPD, vapor pressure deficit, and really maximizing the plant growth as well.
Absolutely. And with VPD, it's a little bit confusing because there's VPD charts out there that are calibrated for ambient room temperature, and they're calibrated for use with sunlight or with high pressure sodium light or other lights that are really designed for human use. So the VPD charts that are out there are still applicable, but with a slight tweak with our LED spectrum, you really do need to keep the room about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer to get the leaves themselves at the same temperature. So the VPD charts are based off an ambient air temperature assumption of how warm that's going to make the leaves. And that assumption is actually incorrect if you give the leaves light that is efficiently tuned spectrally for what they want to absorb.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before. That's really cool. Can you touch on that a little bit more? Some people out there might not know what VPD is and might not know why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So VPD is vapor pressure deficit, and it's basically the difference in water vapor pressure inside the leaf versus outside the leaf. So you've got relative humidity in the room, and you've also got relative humidity in the stomata, or the breathing pores of each leaf. And you want the plant to be able to breathe or respire efficiently. And it needs to respire to get rid of moisture, as well as to get rid of oxygen it's creating, and be able to pull in carbon dioxide, because it needs the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. And it needs to get rid of excess oxygen because it's creating that all the time with photosynthesis. You also actually need to get rid of moisture out of the leaf, because that's how plants actually get moisture to come up from their roots up to the leaves and carry with it all the nutrients that they're sucking up with their roots. So if you have an extremely high humidity environment, not only are you inviting problems with insects and mold and some bacteria, but you're also kind of stifling the plant's ability to transport water from its roots up to its leaves. So vapor pressure deficit is a clever way of measuring the relative deficit or difference between the water pressure basically in the leaves and the water pressure in the air in the ambient environment, because you want there to be a difference so that plants actually lose water to the air so that they can suck the nutrients up from their roots. So vapor pressure deficit, if you look at the purest definitions, is actually based on the leaf surface temperature. But all of the charts out there are actually based on ambient room temperature, because leaf surface temperature is actually something that's fairly difficult to measure yourself. You can get thermometers, little infrared thermometers that you aim at a leaf, and you can tell the temperature of a leaf at a given point. But that literally gives you 1 point of data, not a full picture of data. So forward-looking infrared cameras are actually available, and that's what we used to do a study about 4 years ago at this point. It's published on our website at blackdogled.com/LST for leaf surface temperature. And it shows literally full pictures, forward-looking infrared camera pictures of the same plants under different lighting spectrums on the same day. So the plants had the same amount of moisture at their roots, and they had the same overall environmental conditions as far as relative humidity. Only difference we changed was the spectrum the plants were exposed to, as well as the temperature. And we can show that with most normal kinds of lights, which are actually designed for humans, whether it's actually a white LED or whether it's a high pressure sodium, the leaves actually stay warmer under that spectrum than they do under ours. And that's because the leaves are more efficiently using the red and blue photons with our lighting spectrum. And that's not warming the leaves up as much. Because of that, in order to get the same leaf temperature, which is what really matters for vapor pressure deficit, you actually have to raise the ambient temperature in the room by about 10 degrees over what you would normally use, or what you would normally look up in a VPD chart, to actually get the same results. So VPD charts are still completely applicable with our lights. You just need to add 10 degrees to the ambient room temperature to get them to work.
That makes sense, and it really echoes the same thing that we had. Who was the other LED we had on just a couple weeks ago, Steve? Sorry, help me out.
Spectrum King.
Spectrum King, that's right. Pretty much echoes what they were saying about their leaf temperature and, you know, vapor pressure, and using those different types of lights for sure. So that's a lot of good information.
Yeah, that was I think the best explanation I've ever heard, especially about having to adjust for temperature and everything. That's definitely something that I hadn't heard before. That was great. Thank you.
Well, and it's something that we've struggled with for a very long time. Like I said earlier, we've been around for about 7 years now. And when the company got started, we would grow the way we knew how to grow. We're long-time growers at Black Dog LED, and we knew how to grow cannabis and grow it very well. But that was all with high-pressure sodium and other types of light, fluorescent light and metal halide light. And we knew from the measurements we were taking of our light output that we should be able to get yields that were much better than we were getting. And it wasn't until we discovered that you really have to raise the temperature 10 degrees to get the leaves themselves to be at their optimal metabolic temperature that we discovered we could actually get the yields up and not only match, but really beat what you can get with a high pressure sodium light. And I realize it's incredibly scary, and we tell customers this all the time. I know the last time your high pressure sodium grow hit 85 degrees, all the plants either heat stressed or died. And the last time it hit 90, everything died. I guarantee it. But with our lights, if you're supplementing CO2, we run at 90 degrees all day long, and the plants are just as happy as can possibly be. And that's how we get maximum yields. And those increased ambient room temperatures are what allow us to really save you a lot of electricity in cooling costs. In larger grows, we typically save about 60% of the cooling costs.
Yeah, I think that's a common mistake that people make when they start comparing lights is, you know, they want to only compare the light itself as opposed to the overall consumption of the grow. Like somehow watts have, you know, a cost different when you're powering an AC versus when you're powering a light or something else. Like, you know, it really, I feel like if you really want to compare, you know, lights specifically, that you have to look at the heat output and understand that, you know, especially when you start spending power to create heat and then using more power to cool it off, that's a, you know, obviously you need to account for that in your math, and that's not as easy to do for a lot of people. You know, some people, you know, it's very easy to just say, oh, okay, well, this light produces that and that produces this, and not think about how much more you're, you know, if you load up a room with, you know, 5 HPS lights, what you're going to have to spend to keep it cool is drastically different than if you have the same wattage lights with LED and have to maintain a lower temperature like you're talking about. It's a twofold kind of issue in my opinion. And so when people start comparing lights to lights, or you know, however you want to say it, whether you're comparing one bulb or one lamp, I guess, like an HPS lamp, for instance, and then you try to compare it to an LED light directly, I mean, it's difficult because, first of all, it's not just one light, right? It's a series of a number of different lights, not a single electrical connection like you have with a lamp. And so it's difficult, I feel like, for people to, like, because I answer questions on this all the time and, you know, get questions on it all the time. So it seems like a difficult point for them to grasp, that it's not, you know, you can't just sort of compare one to the other, like, you know, it's an apples and orange thing. You gotta look a little bit deeper than just what they print on the side of the box where it says 600 watt LED, and it's $60, and you're like, well, you know, that's not 600 watts. And, you know, there's all this stuff that you have to go through, but it's a very deceiving market for people to step through. So I feel like the explanation goes a long ways to help that out, and you know, give our users here a little bit more content to help them sort out some of the more deceptive marketing that you run into, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
All the time on the forum too, like you said, these people go, yeah, you can get this big giant LED, and I say that's only 280 watts. Now, it's not a bad light, but it's only 280 watts. It's not 600. So that's a very good point to bring up too.
Yeah, and in many ways, it's very simple in terms of the heat output. Physics dictates that 1 watt going into anything, any kind of electrical appliance, whether it's a light, be it LED or HPS, or a toaster oven, will produce 3.41 BTUs of heat per hour per watt. And the reason for that is energy can neither be created nor destroyed, and it always ends up as heat. Physics always manages to make it end up as heat. So if you make it light in the meantime, if you convert electricity into light, that light is bouncing around your grow room, and that's great. But as soon as it lands on something and is absorbed by something, it gets turned back into heat. Or if it lands on a leaf, it gets turned into sugars. But unfortunately for us, most plants are actually incredibly inefficient at turning lights into sugar. The most efficient plant in the world is sugarcane, and it's ranging from 8 to 10% efficiency. Cannabis plants are actually 1 to 3% efficient at turning light into sugars and actual growth. So you can pretty much ignore that and just assume that 100% or 99% of the energy you're putting into your lights, no matter what kind of light it is going to end up as heat in your grow room. So 1,000 watts is 1,000 watts worth of heat no matter what. The difference is LEDs can produce more light in the meantime, so you need less wattage to get equal light with the LEDs, as long as you're dealing with high quality LEDs. You mentioned the $60 LEDs that you can get. Those tend to not be the high quality LEDs. Those tend to be the LEDs which are cheap for a reason, because they're not very efficient and they don't produce a lot of light per watt. And so there, you can get all sorts of LED grow lights on the market right now. Most of them are actually incredibly inefficient. And honestly, any LED light that doesn't tell you how much light it actually puts out, and I'm not talking about an intensity measurement at a point a certain distance away from the light, I'm talking about the total light output of the fixture is what you need to be looking for. And if they're not advertising that, there's a reason they're not advertising that. It's because it's not that great. If you've got an LED fixture that actually can put out a lot of light, they're going to advertise the total amount of light output that fixture puts out. because it doesn't matter how bright it is at a single point. There's a lot of companies out there that use lenses under their LEDs and other mechanisms to focus all of the light into one point so that they can show on paper, hey, look at how bright our light is. And that's great if you were growing a plant that's a square inch, just one little tiny plant, then that would be great. But if you're trying to cover any actual area for growing, it doesn't matter how bright it is at a point, you have to look at the total light output.
Right, which makes total sense. And, you know, just to kind of bring that full circle, I guess, you know, we were talking about how no matter what you consume, a watt is a watt is a watt. So, you know, understanding that, you know, like you said, lower quality LEDs to start with, and then you also have low quality drivers driving them. So you're basically, that heat is being output before it ever gets made into light. You're not making any use of it as light in your grow room. So that's why it's less effective in terms of getting light to your plants, because if your drivers are inefficient and they're putting off heat, and then you're going to be losing that before you ever even start outputting light. And that's another, I guess it's going to go somewhere. We want to turn as much of it as we can into light, as opposed to just putting off heat to begin with. That we have to cool off.
That heat comes a lot from another attribute, or not an attribute, but a downfall of these cheaper lights is the heat sink. That's why they're putting off the heat. The heat sinks are real cheap and wear out actually after some time. Isn't that true, Kevin?
So the heat sinks are very important for LED lights, but it's usually not the case. They're typically a chunk of aluminum. They don't tend to wear out. But with lesser efficient LEDs, you're ending up with more heat at the LED that is just wasted energy, and it needs to be dissipated from the LED. Because unlike high-pressure sodium lights or other high-intensity discharge lights, where you're actually creating light by heating something up to the point where it glows, in those type of lights, you actually reduce efficiency if you cool the bulb. The air-cooled fixtures that are available for high-intensity discharge lights actually, for the most part, decrease the intensity of the light that's coming out, because they're decreasing the efficiency, because they're cooling down that bulb, and that means it's not going to glow as much as if it were warmer. So it's a catch-22 there. If you cool it off to help keep your grow room cooler, you're actually getting less total light out of it, and you're actually producing more waste in the form of heat that you're sucking out. But with LEDs, it's exactly the opposite. The cooler you keep an LED, the more efficiently it runs, and the longer it will last. So the key to LEDs is keep them as cool as possible. And there's a lot of fixtures on the market that advertise they've got no moving parts and they're passively cooled and there's no fans to break. And that's true. They don't have any moving parts and there's no fans to break, but they're doing that at the cost of running the LEDs themselves a lot warmer. And that's not only decreasing the longevity of the LEDs, how long they'll last and how long they'll put light out for, but it's also decreasing the efficiency. So the warmer you get an LED, ironically, the more heat it actually puts out and the less light it does. So the key to LEDs is really keeping them as cool as possible, to keep them as efficient as possible, keep them churning out as many photons as possible per watt that you're putting in, as well as keeping them running for as long as possible. So that's why we actually have active cooling in our lights. We know that there are fans in there, they're moving parts. Yes, they can break. Our fans are very high end. We actually source fans that are designed for a lifetime of 70,000 plus hours, so they should actually last longer than our LEDs. And we've been doing this for 7 years. We have very few fan failures in the field ever. We also put redundant fans in. So if one fan does break, your fixture keeps on working just fine, and the LEDs keep staying cool, and they last a long time, and they're as efficient as possible. And if you get rid of the fans and you spread the LEDs out so that you can help dissipate some of the heat, you can do that. And yes, there's no fans, but if you look at those companies that are doing that, they typically advise aiming a fan at their light to help keep it cool. So basically, they're just putting the onus on you to get a fan and aim it at their light, as opposed to building it into the light fixture where we think it belongs in the first place.
Great information there.
So you guys are one of the few companies that have UVA and B diodes. Do you want to talk a little bit on the importance of that? And I know it definitely increases trichome production. I noticed a pretty big jump when I was growing up around 9,000 feet in Colorado. The trike production, because all the extra UV in the greenhouse alone was pretty ridiculous. But I noticed, especially with growing with your lights, the one or two times I got to grow back when I was still working at the aquaponics source with your lights, we had, they were a little bit trichier than some of the other ones that were, other ones that we tested. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. So we actually only have UVA diodes in our lights. We don't have UVB diodes in our lights, and there's several reasons for that. There's technical reasons. UVB diodes are still, as far as LEDs are concerned, very inefficient. Their lifespans are measured in about 4,000 to 5,000 hours, the best ones you can get on the market right now, and they're obnoxiously expensive. So they just don't last. You can honestly make UVB much less expensively, much more economically with what they call reptile bulbs that are available in pet stores. And that's because reptiles actually do require UVB light to keep healthy. And those are just fluorescent tubes that have been specially treated to give off UVB light. And it's still the most economical way to make UVB light if you want to make UVB light. However, we've also done a lot of studies, including with reptile bulbs and exposing plants to UVB light. And while there are some scientific studies out there for plants other than cannabis showing that UVB light and UVB light alone does create some responses in those plants, and the only one I'm aware of is actually rutabagas have a pigment they produce only in exposure to UVB light. But we're not aiming to grow rutabagas with light. We're aiming to grow cannabis with our light. There's a very famous study that was done back in 1987, somehow funded by the federal government in the United States, on cannabis plants. And they tested exposure of cannabis plants to no UV or UVB light, they thought. It turns out, because spectrometers used to be very obnoxiously expensive back in 1987, they didn't have the ability to test what they were really exposing the plants to. So they put a filter under a broad spectrum UV light source, and their filter that they put under they thought was blocking UVA, but there have been subsequent studies showing that their filter didn't block anything. So they were really only exposing cannabis plants to either no UV light or full UVA and UVB light. And they noticed a distinct increase in the plants that were exposed to UV light. And they attributed that to UVB light exposure. But again, they were actually exposing the plants to UVA and UVB. So we've done our own tests, and we can show that with plants exposed to UVA light, you get increased trichome production, just like they found in the 1987 study. You get increased THC and CBD levels, just like they found in the 1987 study. And we do it without UVB, but only with UVA. One of the other reasons we don't like UVB is because they separate UV into four different kinds of UV. One they call vacuum ultraviolet, and that has so much energy that normal air will block it. That's why they call it vacuum UV. Vacuum UV is incredibly dangerous. It will kill you, literally. There's UVC light, which is also blocked almost completely by air. Basically, after going through just a few hundred yards of air, all UVC light will be blocked. So none of the sunlight that contains UVC actually makes it through our atmosphere. Plants, animals are not ever exposed to it on Earth. Even at the top of Mount Everest, you're getting only an incredibly tiny amount of UVC light making it through. But UVC light is commonly used in hospitals for sterilization purposes, and that's because it has so much energy, it immediately breaks apart DNA. It doesn't cause cancer, it kills things. It just destroys DNA. UV.
I had let me chime in real quick. When I worked in Boulder, there was a guy at the virology lab in Boulder, and they had a 5,000 watt UV bulb that they use for the virology lab in case something ever accidentally got out. They just turn it on and it nukes the whole room. And this guy, what happened was the maintenance guy was one of the guys who come in to work on fish tanks and stuff. Well, he was working on it, and some guy walked in and didn't know that he was working on it and just flipped the light switches on and didn't realize that one of them was the UV. And it was right after he put the bulb in, and he got hit for about I think it was 3.5 seconds with UVC from a 5,000 watt bulb. All of his skin came off, his first layer of skin, and he was blind for 2 weeks. Like, you have to be very careful. That's why if you're ever working on a UV sterilizer, if you happen to use one for some reason, which there isn't really a reason to use one in aquaponics, we've talked before about how it breaks down the chelation on iron, boron, manganese, and a few others. It just makes them non-bioavailable. Or significantly less so. There was a big study by Dr. Resch in hydroponic gardening. If you guys, it's one of the most popular hydroponic books in terms of chemistry out there. There's a whole section on it about UV in there and how it affects chemistry. But it's really, you have to be very careful whenever you work with UV and make sure it's unplugged and disconnected, not just turned off. Because if you do have an accident or something turns on anyway, you're going to be hospitalized for at least a period of time, depending on the wattage.
Yeah, UVC is very dangerous, and it's very efficient and effective at sterilizing things, but really you don't want to sterilize your plants. It doesn't just sterilize the surface of the plants, it sterilizes everything, including the leaves, and as you mentioned, skin and everything else. So UVC is energetic enough that Earth's atmosphere blocks it all out. It's basically only available via artificial sources, such as the bulb you had mentioned. UVB is what makes it through our atmosphere primarily just around noon. When the sun is at a lower angle in the sky, there's enough atmosphere between us and the sun that all UVB light is blocked out. So UVB is only typically getting through our atmosphere for a couple hours around noon, peaks around noontime. And UVB still has enough energy in it that it breaks down DNA, and that's what causes cancer. That's what causes melanoma. And exposure to UVB is dangerous. That's why you have to wear sunscreen to prevent cancer from exposure to sunlight. They made the distinction between UVB and UVA because UVA does not have enough energy to break down DNA. It's still somewhat damaging. It breaks down collagen in our skin, so it can lead to accelerated aging or wrinkly skin, but it doesn't actually have enough energy to cause cancer. It still elicits all of the same responses from our body and from plants that UVB exposure does in terms of trying to protect yourself from ultraviolet exposure. So exposure to UVA light in humans will still cause tans to happen, but it will not cause cancer. And in plants, plants respond in different ways depending on the kinds of plants they are. But plants with trichomes, such as cannabis, typically increase trichome production when they get exposed to ultraviolet light, whether it's UVA or UVB. They can't really tell the difference, and that's what we want with cannabis plants, is to increase trichome production. It also triggers them to create thicker cell walls to protect themselves from the ultraviolet light, and that makes the plants more resistant to, not immune, but more resistant to attack by fungus and insects and bacteria and viruses. So UVA light actually does slow down growth a little bit, not as much, nearly so as UVB light exposure does in plants, but we deliberately include it in our fixtures because we've done many, many tests over the years showing ourselves and laboratory tests as well that including UVA in the light spectrum actually yields a healthier plant. It may slightly decrease the yield, but it more than makes up for that in terms of trichome production and THC and CBD production, as well as all of the terpenes and other antioxidants in other kinds of plants. In addition, the more energy a photon has coming through a canopy of plant leaves, the deeper it can actually penetrate into the canopy. So UVA light can actually penetrate through several layers of leaves on its way through the canopy. It loses energy on each leaf it passes through. It actually starts out at a UV photon at the top leaf, but as soon as it goes through that, it's no longer ultraviolet. It may shift into a blue or yellow photon. By the time it hits the fourth or fifth leaf down, it finally shifts to a red photon that is still usable. But the higher energy it has at the top of the canopy, the more penetration you get with that light. So we deliberately include ultraviolet A and deep blue, which almost no other LED light has, in our fixture because it actually helps canopy penetration. And that means that lower leaves in the canopy actually get a lot more energy and that actually increases yield. So at the top, UVA light might decrease yield just a little bit, but it makes up for it in terms of bud production lower in the canopy.
Awesome. I never knew that. That was that was a way more to it than I was originally anticipating. That was great. So do you want to explain the advantages of the LEDs over, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but advantages of LEDs over ceramic metal halide or, high pressure sodium, or, why should someone that has a grow light right now, switch over?
Absolutely. So high pressure sodium is kind of the industry standard, and there's good reason for that. It's been the most efficient light that's been available consistently for a very long time. And only recently has it been dethroned by other technologies in the past 4 or 5 years. So like I had mentioned earlier, if you bombard plants with enough light, as long as it's a broad enough spectrum, they'll grow and they'll be happy. But as people know, with high pressure sodium lights, most people don't veg grow with high pressure sodium lights because they know the plants get weak and leggy. And that's because the spectrum for high pressure sodium is actually not wide enough. It doesn't include enough blue to keep the plants happy. And plants have hormonal responses to different colors of lights in the spectrum. Blue light is what helps keep the internodal spacing, or the stem length, shorter on plants. A lot of red light increases internodal spacing, and that's because plants evolved to hormonally respond to the color of light they receive. Just like I had mentioned earlier, as photons are going through the canopy of leaves, they lose energy and they tend to shift from blue, ultraviolet to blue to red, and finally to infrared, which plants can't usually make use of. So if you're growing in a forest with lots of leaves up above you, you're going to see not very much blue light at all, because that's all been absorbed by the upper leaves, or it's all been shifted into the red colors of the spectrum. So plants hormonally respond to seeing more red light than blue light by saying, I'm being shaded out by something up above, so I need to grow my stems longer to try and outgrow whatever is shading me out. It doesn't matter if they're getting all the light they need. It's a hormonal response. They just naturally increase the length of their stems if they're seeing a lot more red light than they are blue light. That's why high pressure sodium lights cause plants to get weak and leggy and grow long stems. And it's not, you can give them all the HPS light in the world and they're still going to be leggy stems for that reason. So one of the best things that came about after high pressure sodium was ceramic metal halide. And ceramic metal halide is great in that they have figured out how to get a much broader spectrum out of a high intensity discharge bulb. Has almost equal amounts of red and blue light in the spectrum, but because of technological limitations, you either have to choose between a blue dominant or a red dominant spectrum. You can't really get both in a single ceramic metal halide bulb. And most of the light energy still comes out in terms of yellow photons, which is great for human eyes. That's where our eyes are most efficient at seeing photons. Not so great for plants. The plants would prefer red or blue light. But ceramic metal halide also has ultraviolet light in it, which high pressure sodium has virtually no ultraviolet light in it. We're talking less than 0.1% of the total photons are ultraviolet. Ceramic metal halide has a significant percentage, about 2 to 3% total ultraviolet light. So anyone that's grown with the ceramic metal halide will notice a significant increase in quality of the buds that they're growing. You'll notice that the internodal spacing is a lot tighter because you're getting a lot more blue light, and that's causing the stems not to elongate as much. Because the plant isn't wasting as much energy growing stems, it has more energy to grow flowers and leaves, which is what we really want. And then the ultraviolet is triggering the plant to create more trichomes and higher THC and CBD levels. So with the ceramic metal halide, you get a much better spectrum than is available with high pressure sodium at almost the same efficiency. And that means that you can get a much higher quality product out of it. LEDs, though, allow us to perfectly tune the spectrum exactly where we want it. So I mentioned earlier that the ceramic metal halide lights still put out predominantly yellow or green light. And again, that makes them perfect lights for humans, but for plants, plants would really prefer red and blue light, and the ceramic metal halides just can't do that because of the way they technically work. So with LEDs, we get to choose exactly how much of each color light we want to put out, And there's a variety of different LED technologies out there, but there's what we call discrete color LEDs that have only one fairly narrow wavelength of light of any given color. And you can get those from ultraviolet, blue, cyan, green, orange, yellow, red. They all have different efficiencies, and it gets very complicated, but you can get these discrete color LEDs. That's what they're replacing stoplights with now. If you look at most modern stoplights, you'll see it's actually made up of a whole bunch of little LEDs that are either red, green, or yellow. With plant lights, though, we specifically want to leave out a lot of the yellow and green, but include a lot more of the red and blue to keep plants happy, keep them efficient, keep their leaves cooler so that you can increase your grow room temperature, save a lot of money that way, and also increase the ultraviolet content. So unlike with ceramic metal halide, where you're getting a good spectrum, but you can't still fine tune it to exactly what you want, LEDs allow us to fine tune it exactly what we want. And by fine tuning it, we're actually saving a lot of energy, not creating a bunch of green and yellow photons in the spectrum. Keeps the plants happier, keeps your wallet happier in terms of yield per watt that you're putting into your grow room, and it increases quality a lot more.
Awesome. Do you want to do you want to talk about what measurement do you recommend, when comparing lights? Would you suggest that PPFD is one of the better measurements as far as that goes, or what would you suggest? I know earlier you were talking about total light output, but is there any other measurements that you would say are worthwhile? I know PPFD is definitely a little harder to spoof in terms of point reading, but it's also hard to accurately test. So
yeah, so there is no perfect reading. I really, really wish there were. It'd be a lot more convenient for us. But to start off with, lumens are a spectral, or not a spectral, a intensity reading specifically weighted by the human eye response. And so one yellow photon counts higher in terms of lumens than a green photon does, and it counts a lot higher than a red or blue photon does. So lumens are absolutely the worst way of looking at light intensity as far as plants are concerned. Lumens literally are defined by the response of the human eye, which is great if you're evaluating lights for humans. It is the perfect way to evaluate lights for humans. It's perfectly wrong for plants. PPF is much better in that it gives equal weight to all visible photons. So that's all blue, green, yellow, red, orange photons throughout the visible spectrum from 400 to 700 nanometers. So that's much, much more fair and a much better way of looking at light intensity than lumens are, because lumens are literally giving weight to the wrong color of light in the spectrum. But PPF is still very deceptive in that, for example, you can have a low pressure sodium light which only puts out yellow photons, and if you have 100 yellow photons, it counts exactly the same PPF as 100 red photons, which plants would actually prefer. So PPF is not a perfect way of measuring light intensity. You mentioned PPFD. So there's photosynthetic photon flux, or PPF, measures all photons from 400 to 700 nanometers. And that technically, PPF itself is the total light output of the light fixture. PPFD, or photosynthetic photon flux density, is the intensity at a single point measurement. So if a company is only giving you PPFD measurements in terms of a single point measurement, that's where you can cheat with all sorts of lenses and focusing the light to one point to make it look like a lot brighter than it really is. But all of these things are imperfect in that low pressure sodium lights would still actually beat the most efficient LED grow lights on the planet in terms of photons per watt, in terms of PPF, in terms of PPFD in a fair test. But it still kills plants. So there's no perfect way of measuring it. There's another measurement called yield photon flux, or YPF, which was invented about, I think, 2 decades ago at this point, which is a much smarter attempt at figuring out how much a photon of a particular color is really worth to a plant. So just like lumens, are weighted for human eye response. The YPF curve is rated for plant leaf response, but it's imperfect in a couple of different ways. One, it was determined based on aiming light of different colors at a particular leaf, not at a canopy of leaves. So it wasn't looking at a whole plant, it was looking only at a single leaf. Also, it was done at a fixed temperature, which our studies have shown that the spectrum of light actually affects the temperature of the leaf, which affects its metabolism, which affects all sorts of things. So it wasn't a fair test that way. And third, it's still just giving weights to photons, and the low pressure sodium lights actually still win in a YPF test because they're so efficient at turning out photons per watt. They look better than any other light on the planet, and yet the reason people don't use them is because they literally kill plants. So there's no perfect way. You actually have to look at we prefer photosynthetic photon flux and PPFD as well, the photosynthetic photon flux at a point. But it's important not to just look at a single point. It's important to look at the entire coverage area. So, for example, we advertise our lights with the average PPFD over the entire advertised footprint of the light. So if the light is supposed to cover a 4 by 4 foot area, we will give the average, and that includes every square inch over the 4 by 4 foot area, including the corners. And there's a lot of reasons that a lot of grow light companies will show you a PPFD chart, and they'll have circles laid out where they give you the intensity at the center, which every light on the planet is always going to be most intense directly under the center of the light.
It's really frustrating.
Yeah. And then they'll give you circles out from that, which they're ignoring the corners, and that's because the corners are the weakest point. They really need to give you the average over the entire area, not the average of just the 12 or 16 or 20 measurement points they chose to give you, but over every single square inch of the entire coverage area. And that's how we advertise our lights. We actually even include the perimeter averages for all of our lights, as well as the lowest points, basically how bright the light is in the corners of the coverage footprint, because that's what really matters if you're trying to grow plants in the entire area.
I was hoping you would touch on that. I was waiting, and then Steve asked a question. That was perfect. Yeah, the measurement. Yeah, you were talking about that earlier, and I'm going, yeah, but so what is the measurement? What is the measurement?
Yeah, it's hard because it's, you really have to, sort of, I feel like when I look at it, I try to consider grow lights on two different levels. Like, first of all, I sort of like rough out what what their general efficacy is in terms of just light in general, like how much light versus heat are you putting out to start with, and then you can just sort of really narrow it down. And you'll find all of those like cheap LEDs that you find, none of those are going to even come close in efficacy, and you can really wipe out and save yourself a lot of time and research to just get those off the board right away. And then like you're talking about with the spectrum, what are you trying to grow? If you're not trying, if you're trying to grow cannabis, then you should probably select something that has a spectrum that has documented support of being able to successfully grow quality cannabis. And not all of them are, like even some of the more expensive ones that you'll find that may even have some higher efficacy. Most of them, like we're talking about, are geared towards the human eye. So, those are probably like, the two categories of things that you sort of have to, you have to have some knowledge of each individual measurement to really sort of decode what it is. And that's why I think that their marketing can be as deceiving as it is, that they can slap a 600 watt max light on a, something that consumes nowhere near 600 watts. And probably if you put 600 watts through it, it would light on fire. So, it's definitely difficult, but it can be done, and you'll learn some stuff in the process, and, hopefully get some good grow lights out of it. And so we appreciate that explanation. And I do want to, I have one more question, not so much a question, but I just want you to talk a little bit about being based in the United States versus some of the other companies that sort of, obviously are trying to tap into our market. And, buying something as local as possible is always something that we talk about on the show. It's something I try to do here. I shop at the co-op a lot. And obviously that's, really the same principle extended to a grow light company, because obviously there's not one here local that I can just drive down to my local LED shop and who engineers them for me. You know, it's not a fair comparison in that manner, but just talk about what it's like, you know, trying to be as American as possible.
Absolutely. So Black Dog LED is based out of Boulder, Colorado. Our lights are actually manufactured in the United States at this point. We source parts from all over the world for very important reasons, and that's because the most efficient LEDs are made all over the planet, and it depends on which color LED they are. I mean, the best red LEDs typically come out of Germany at this point. Best blue LEDs are coming out of either North Carolina or China at this point. They're all over the place, and we have to pick and choose the most efficient LEDs we can get from all over the world, and that's what we do. But we bring them all here, we assemble everything here, do quality checks on everything here. We've got the longest warranty of any LED grow light, or actually any grow light I'm aware of on the planet. We've got a 5-year full warranty on our LEDs, and that's because we've been around now for 7 years. We know how these lights can work and how they can last if they're properly built. And as I mentioned earlier, the key to longevity with LEDs is keeping them cool. If you don't engineer the entire fixture to keep the LEDs themselves cool enough, they may burn very brightly to begin with, but as you mentioned, they might start on fire. They typically don't start on fire, but it will burn out the LEDs very quickly. So it may be very bright and very inexpensive to start, but if the fixture itself was not engineered properly, you're not going to keep those LEDs running at their peak efficiency for very long. So we're very proud to actually be manufactured here in the United States and in Colorado, and provide complete local support. We pride ourselves on providing the best customer service possible, not just on answering light questions, but also growing questions in general. Everyone that answers the phone at Black Dog LED is actually a grower. We've got many decades of combined experience in the office in terms of growing cannabis under artificial lights, growing all sorts of plants. I personally, besides cannabis, have tropical fruit trees that I've been growing in my basement for over 20 years at this point. So if you need to figure out how to grow mangoes or guavas or mangosteens, we can help with that too. And we're very proud to provide that support and provide it locally. We also have distributors around the world that we have set up so that they can provide local support, whether it's in Europe or Australia, for that reason.
Awesome. Yeah, I know when I used to work at the aquaponics source, and we sold a whole bunch of your lights, and we never had a single one come back or have any problems. And you know, the one in the showroom was, you know, super great. We were able to grow stuff, you know, 4 to 6 feet away from it, you know, horizontally, just up the wall, you know, thanks to the reach of that thing. So, you know, they were really awesome to work with. So.
Yep, and that's why I got involved with this company, with Black Dog LED, because I've been a lifelong hobbyist grower and had a large disposable income, and was able to try every kind of light I could get my hands on. And I even tried a number of different kinds of LEDs before I tried my first Black Dog LED, and it was really the first light that made me realize that, wow, there really is a huge difference that you can make if you get the right spectrum and the intensity with the light. You can grow things like you've never grown before under high intensity discharge lights.
Yep, some plants will even look different.
Yeah, and that's a question we actually get all the time. A lot of people that are longtime high pressure sodium growers will see purple streaks in their cannabis stems and leaves, and they assume that that means it's somehow nutrient deficient. They usually think it's a magnesium deficiency, but it's because they've never actually tried growing that plant under natural sunlight, which includes ultraviolet, because if they did, they'd realize that that's how the plant should look in nature. It's naturally got those purple streaks on it, and it's only because you've never given it ultraviolet light that you've never seen that before.
No,
So I've definitely noticed that in other. It's not a Black Dog, but I've noticed it in a different high power LED light that has relatively similar spectrum. And so basically, but I've seen that in my plants where, you know, you definitely have that purple streaking, and I basically did nothing about it and it just stopped. And that's basically, is that just the plant getting used to it after a certain amount of time, or what is, do you have any idea?
Actually, if it stopped, that probably means it wasn't getting exposed to ultraviolet light anymore. It's actually a normal response for a lot of kinds of plants to produce that purple pigment, which is called anthocyanin. It's a natural form of sunscreen for the plant. It's exactly akin to how our skin tans with exposure to ultraviolet light. The melatonin that our skin produces is designed as a natural sunscreen. And for plants, anthocyanin, which is a purplish reddish pigment, is produced as a sunscreen to help protect the plant from ultraviolet light exposure. And that's specifically to help prevent damage from exposure to ultraviolet B light or UVB light, to prevent it from breaking down the DNA of the plant. But it produces that with exposure simply to UVA. So that's actually a good thing in a lot of cases. A lot of the strains of cannabis, for example, that develop purple pigmentation, a lot of people using HPS lights will go to extremes to stress the plant to get it to produce that pigmentation late in flower by decreasing the temperature and having massive temperature swings between day and night. But it turns out if you expose it to UV light, that's all that's required. You don't have to do those massive temperature swings. You need to stress the
less efficient, right? I mean,
exactly.
Talking about especially the HPS, not with LEDs, but a lot of times HPS, they do cool the room down significantly in order to achieve that, and that's definitely true. And I did see that once they went back into flower, late in flower, the chlorophyll starts to fade and you see it more pronounced again there as well. And I definitely feel like it experienced it more under LED for sure than under HPS or even ceramic mellow halide. I don't feel like I have the two 330 watt conversion lamps from Philips, so they just screw into an old magnetic ballast. And I have two of those that I've grown under, and they don't turn purple under like any of the LEDs I've grown under, and same strains in a lot of instances too. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yep. I find it interesting about that because as a running a forum with thousands of members, you might have just solved a problem for me because we got guys that we mentor and they're doing everything right, and you can't. The plant looks great otherwise, and they're going, why is this reddish, purplish color? Where and it just doesn't make sense. And now you just gave me an alternative way of looking at it. Thank you very much.
High magnesium and high sulfur can do that too. I know when I was in Jamaica last year, I saw a lot of plants, especially we test the water and it would come out, super high in sulfur and magnesium just because it's filtered through aragonite. The old coral skeletons basically is how the water, gets filtered through the aquifers. But it's super, super clean water. It's mineralized, but the plants get this bright red or, almost looks like it has a deficiency. They almost look slightly yellow. There's nothing wrong with them. They're super great. They produce super heavy, just a matter of, the way that the plant tries to excrete a little bit of an excess, a buildup.
Well, Kevin said it was like a protection layer of protection.
Exactly. Yep. It's a natural sunscreen.
Yeah.
It's an antioxidant. I mean, they actually, with pomegranate juice and other things, they're bragging about how many antioxidants they've got in these juices, and that is exactly what the plants are producing with this purple pigment.
Yep. So the other two things, if you're trying to boost your anthocyanin production, is making sure that your molybdenum is properly in the proper range. Molybdenum is one of the main nutrients that is used for the production of anthocyanin. The other thing, if you're trying to really purple up your plants, is swing the temperature between night and day, and that also helps increase it, along with proper lighting, like he was just saying. And most of the strains have to be indica dominant. Not all, but in general, indica dominant strains tend to have a lean more heavily towards being.
I feel like you have to have genetics too. Like some of them are just going to turn yellow. That's just what it's going to be. It's not going to turn purple. All you can really do is initiate the change and see what happens.
Yeah, if it doesn't have the genes to produce those pigments, it's nothing you can do will make it purple, short of painting it.
Right. Now, a lot of people may tell you otherwise, but I have yet to ever see it. So when you find it, tell them to send it over, and I'll I'll eat my crow with salt. But
Do you want
I
to
made that offer many times, and it's never happened. So
do you want to touch a little bit about on I know you guys have infrared, but do you want to talk a little bit in your fixtures? You want to talk a little bit on that, and then you want to touch a little bit on the far red and how that helps put the plants to sleep with the and how it affects the phytochrome and all that. I know your lights were definitely one of the first out there to pay any attention to that, and I noticed especially with peppers, tomatoes, and cannabis, it definitely made a marked difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So infrared light, just like ultraviolet light, is divided up into different wavelengths of infrared. And some infrared light is perceived by plants and humans as just being heat. It only serves to heat up the leaves. They can't make any use of it, so it's entirely wasted energy that's just going to be turned into heat. So what we call mid-infrared or far infrared is all just wasted energy on the plants. And ironically, that's what high-pressure sodium puts out a lot of. High-pressure sodium bulbs have a huge peak in their spectral output right at about 818 nanometers, and that's what makes them feel so warm to your skin and so warm to the plants as well, because it's a whole bunch of energy coming out that is not usable to us. It's just creating heat. But there was a study actually done back in the 1950s by a guy named Emerson, which discovered that while infrared photons, what we call near-infrared photons, between 700 and 750 nanometers, are worthless to a plant in terms of photosynthesis. You could bombard a plant with those photons all day long. It's never going to do anything with them if that's the only light it's receiving. So it's worthless in terms of photosynthesis by itself. However, when he gave a plant a combination of red light or far red light, which is between 600 and 700 nanometers, and the infrared light between 700 and 750 nanometers, he discovered that it actually boosted photosynthetic efficiency. So whereas you can give a plant 2 red photons and it may successfully capture both and use both of them, if you give it a red photon and an infrared photon, that's actually worth more energy to the plant than 2 red photons is. So it's not that it actually does anything for photosynthesis directly, except increase the efficiency of photosynthesis, and it increases the efficiency with which plants can use red photons of light. And it's fairly common knowledge that plants need red light. Again, it's a hormonal response, but they need red light specifically for the purposes of flowering and producing fruit. And that's because of the hormones they produce in response to red light. So we need to give plants enough blue light, we need to give them enough red light, but if we also give them a little bit of infrared light, it actually increases photosynthetic efficiency through what has been called the Emerson effect, after the guy that discovered it. And then you also mentioned phytochrome. So there's a chemical inside plants called phytochrome, which is a little molecule that switches between 2 different states depending on what kind of light, what color of light it was last exposed to. So when it's exposed to red light, it flips into one state, which basically tells the plant, hey, it's still daytime, I can photosynthesize, and that's how the plant actually figures out the day length. When it isn't exposed to red light, it slowly reverts to its other form, or when it's exposed to infrared light between 700 and 750 nanometers, that causes it to revert into its other form, which means the plant is thinking it's not receiving bright sunlight at that point. And that is what makes cannabis plants specifically think that their night period has gotten long enough that it's time to flower. A lot of people think the day length is important for cannabis plants, that you need 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness to get a plant to flower, but it's actually only the night length that's important for the reason of this phytochrome degradation to degrade from the red form to the infrared form. And you could actually give a cannabis plant 20 hours a day of light, as long as you gave it 12 hours of darkness after that. Before you get it another 20 hours of light, it will flip into flower at that point. And it's only the night period that matters for that, or the amount of near-infrared light that it's receiving. So by including near-infrared light in the spectrum, we can actually help trigger some of that phytochrome to switch over to the nighttime or infrared form. and help increase the hormonal response for triggering flowering earlier in the plant.
And that would allow
Do you
you to
run
have
any kind of crazy flowering schedules yourself, or have you ever experimented with that yourself?
Have tried a few. It's difficult to do that logistically because it's always tricky to remember when the lights are on, when you can go into water. So it's a logistical nightmare from that perspective. But it's been repeatedly demonstrated over and over that it's only the nighttime period that matters. It's not the daytime period. And that's why light leaks in a growing area at night will actually cause the plants stress and revert them out of their flowering form. If you have your lights go off in the middle of the day, that doesn't cause the plant stress if it's only for a few minutes. So you can have 12 55-minute long light periods during the day followed by 5 minutes of darkness. That causes the plant no stress whatsoever. But if you give it 1 5-minute period of light in the middle of its 12 hours of darkness, that causes a big problem.
Interesting.
Awesome. Have you ever tried like the 8-day week or anything like that?
So it's one of the many experiments that we would love to do. There's so many wonderful experiments that can and should be done, and so little time and space to do them in. And we're so constantly busy doing tests with one light spectrum versus another and different light intensities that we haven't had a chance to really do that effectively yet. I've done one partially for a while, and then it got screwed up because the tent was opened by some idiot, namely myself, who thought the lights were on, but they weren't. So it doesn't take much to screw up a test like that.
Yeah, we've all had problems with timers and all that stuff. For those of you guys that don't know, an 8-day week is when you set your timers so that the plants are off for 12 hours and on for 8 hours. And the idea is that you can get a 20-hour day and an 8-day week in a 7-day period. So that's the concept. But like he's saying, it gets kind of wonky because the hours that it's on change. So you have to almost make a schedule.
It changes every day.
Yep. So.
I haven't seen anybody that's done like a yield comparison though, everybody has their own opinions, it seems like, but I've yet to come across like any like real solid numbers. Like, if I run 12 hours of light, all the way to the end, I know a lot of people have done it a lot of different ways, but all of them just proclaim it's the best without ever growing it any other way. So I guess it's hard for me to like really jump on the bandwagon, but it sounds cool. They definitely finish faster. I think that's been documented, that the 8 days a week thing definitely finishes faster, but whether or not you lose anything in yield, it seems like always one of those perpetual arguments like, no, it's definitely not worth it, or yes, it definitely is. And I don't know, it's a polarizing discussion on most forums, I think, but it would be interesting to see somebody do like actual just like straight grow off, but just like you're saying, space and time and everything else. Like, yeah, there's tons of experiments I'd love to do, but my garage is only so big and I only have so much money. So, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully with this new greenhouse I'm building and a 96 plant count, I can do a couple of those.
So Steve, did you want to ask that question from chat?
Oh yeah, Chicken Hole wants to know, is there a place you'd recommend buying your lights or to buy them directly from your website?
So we've got a number of different hydroponic stores across the country that carry our lights, not just the United States, but Canada, Europe, Australia, all over the world. And we're always big supporters of local hydroponic stores because when you do have a question or a problem, there's nothing like being able to walk in and talk to someone who's had a lot of experience growing plants. So we recommend buying them from your local hydroponic store, or you can buy them directly from our website. Either way works.
Do you have affiliates that sell for you online?
So there are a number of different websites online that also sell our lights as well. Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. It's always good to see companies that are supporting the local grow shops, especially when you got bug problems or deficiency problems. There's nothing better than taking a leaf or a picture into the.
And not only that, but I mean, sometimes, I mean, it's really convenient to order things off Amazon, and with Prime, you get it the next day. But sometimes you need it right now, and that's where you need the brick and mortar store. Because when you run out of that bottle of nutrients and you're in the middle of mixing up your fertilizer, you need it right now. You can't wait a day or two. So it's important to support your local stores as well.
That is
absolutely.
I agree. I definitely agree with supporting the local stores. I don't know about all of them having experience growing things.
No, there's
sure if you've been to some of my local grow shops or not, but I'm pretty sure they're minimum wage high school kids.
Yeah.
Would otherwise work at Burger King. But aside from that, I agree that they should still be there, because it's definitely, there are times in which you don't have time to wait 2 days or even want to pay for overnight shipping, or it's even available. Like if it's Saturday, you're not getting overnight on Sunday. It's just not happening. So I definitely think that it employs somebody locally, and money spent locally turns over more. And there's lots of reasons that I do it personally, but I definitely appreciate having them. And I've seen your lights in a lot of our stores locally. So definitely like that. So here in Southern Oregon, you guys have been around for, probably at least 4 or 5 years that I can remember people having them and using them with success, in time in which there wasn't a lot of people having success with LED for a number of different reasons. I feel like some growers don't have success to start with, so you have to kind of start there and understand that you still got to be able to grow plants regardless. If you buy $1,000 lights, you got to be able to feed them and water them. So after taking that into account, and then also the learning curve that comes with switching it. Like we talked about a lot of stuff that has been figured out over those years of time. Like you said, even you guys didn't even necessarily know. So and still had a lot of people have a lot of success with them. So I've always heard great things about it, even though I've never grown with one. Everybody that I've heard of that's made the investment of doing it hasn't regretted it, other than maybe some of the ones that still can't grow any plants. But I won't call anybody out on here.
Yeah, my favorite story there, we offer a 90-day money-back guarantee on any one of our lights so that people can try them and see for themselves. Because so many of you on the market overpromise and underdeliver. But so we give people 90 days to try growing with them themselves. And shortly after I joined the company, someone called and wanted to return their LED grow light because it killed their plants. And I knew the light didn't kill their plants unless it fell on them or something.
Right.
So I started asking them questions, and come to find out they hadn't watered their plants. They didn't understand that you had to water the plant to keep it alive, but they were sure that the light killed the plant.
And yeah, that makes sense.
I had a lady call me from a farm from the southern half of the United States, so I don't make them feel bad. And this lady, back when I worked at the Aquaponic Service, calls me. She had just spent like $140,000 building a commercial greenhouse. Got all of her lettuce in, all the rafts full, all the stuff. No one explained to her what pH was or how to measure and dose iron.
Yeah.
And it was just like, how did you spend that much money and just have zero thought to the education half of this thing and how it's actually going to run? Like, people need, like, now that happens less so with aquaponics because people usually get gung-ho about it and read about it a lot. But it is kind of funny. Every now and then you'll get a grower, or even, weed growers too, that are just, why did they think that, just dumping money at the problem is going to make the thing grow?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how much you read up or study up on something. Growing is equal parts skill and art form, and it's really something you have to learn for yourself. And I've been doing it for 35 years under artificial lights now. There's not a single day that goes by I don't learn something new about growing plants indoors under lights, and that's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it exciting. but you can do all the reading in the world, and that doesn't mean you're going to be prepared to set up some massive facility somewhere. There's nothing that replaces experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had people, I've talked about this on the show before, but I've had people put OxyClean in their system to try and clean up their aquaponic system and thinking it wouldn't kill the fish. I've had people try to kill aphids with window cleaner. You know, you name it, I've seen it. I had a guy ask if he could feed his baby fish by pleasuring himself into the fish tank with a straight face. Like, you name it. And that was in Boulder, too, actually. So that was a good one.
That sounds like something that might come out of Boulder.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The Boulder bubble, man, they're strange sometimes. But well, is there any other questions anyone has in chat? This has been a really wonderful episode so far. We've learned a whole lot of different things. Is there any other points you wanted to mention about your lights? You want to maybe touch on the different sizes that you guys offer, and you know, maybe the sizes that the footprint for people out there are maybe interested in getting one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 5 different sizes of lights that range from 210 actual watt draw up to 1,050 actual watt draw. So we have 5 different sizes for a reason, because there's a lot of different growing areas, and if you're only looking to grow a very small area, you don't need a 1,000-watt light. So our 200-watt light, I personally like it the best because it's the lightest weight. It's the easiest to move around our office. They're so silent you can't even tell that they're on when they're running. And it's really the ultimate in a small grow light if you're only interested in growing a small area. Our 1,000-watt light at the other end of the spectrum is literally the brightest LED grow light and the brightest grow light on the planet in terms of photons delivered to the plants themselves. So high-pressure sodium bulbs, double-ended high-pressure sodium bulbs, are still slightly more efficient at creating photons. But half of those photons are aimed up away from your plants, and you can put a reflector over that, and the reflector claims it's 98% efficient, but that's only at some spectral colors that it's 98% efficient. You're actually losing a lot of photons in that reflector, and so we can actually deliver 20% more photons to your plant than the best double-ended high-pressure sodium on the market. With 1,050 watts. So, and we're doing it with 200 less watts energy, and it's a much better spectrum. You'll get much better quality results out of it. In between, we've got a 400, a 600, and 800 watt light. Our 800 watt light basically replaces a 1,000-watt double-ended high-pressure sodium running at 1,000 watts. Our 600 watt light replaces a single-ended high-pressure sodium, and our 400-watt light replaces a 600-watt high-pressure sodium. So,
are the footprints are pretty much the same? Are you saying the footprints are, when you're saying it replaces a double end, or just go to a single 600 like you just mentioned, your 400-watt cover, which what most people have now, a 600-watt single end? You know, most of your small growers, they're running that. Is it the same footprint?
Right. So by replacing, I mean puts out the same amount of photons, and the footprint, just like with high-pressure sodium lights, the footprint depends on, with high-pressure sodium, depends on how high above the plants you're hanging it, how much you're allowing that light to spread out from the fixture. Right. Yeah. With high-pressure sodium, it also depends on which hood you get, because that changes how it reflects out. But with our LEDs, that's not a factor. With our LEDs, the footprint is dictated purely by the height you're hanging them above the plants. So you can cover an 8 by 8 foot area with our 200-watt light at exactly the same hanging height that our 1,000-watt light covers an 8 by 8 foot area, but you're going to get a dramatically different level of intensity, light intensity there. And that's where we actually don't advertise a single footprint for our lights. We actually advertise multiple different footprints for our lights for different light intensities. So we actually, for each of our light sizes, we have 4 different footprints that we advertise. One is the maximum vegetative footprint that we would recommend for that. And that would be if you're growing cannabis or peppers or tomatoes, but you're not looking to get them to flower, you're just looking to do early vegetative growth while the plants are still relatively small and not massive trees. We've got a maximum recommended flowering footprint, which is the level of light intensity, and to get back to the ppfd measurements, it's 300 ppfd on average over the entire footprint, corner to corner, every square inch of the footprint, is where we feel the minimum light intensity is required to get decent results from flowering or fruiting plants. Then we have a medium recommended footprint, which is actually double the light intensity. It's 600 ppfd over the entire footprint. And that's where we find that you get the maximum results out of any flowering or fruiting plants without supplementing CO2. When we start increasing light intensity over that, you may increase yield, but the increase in yield is not going to be linear unless you are starting to supplement CO2. So basically, 600 ppfd is where we see the light level maximizing as far as the plant's ability to fully utilize that. Any more light than that, you actually need to start supplementing CO2 to get the full benefit of that extra light. And that's why we have a third footprint, which is our minimum recommended flowering footprint, which is if you are ready to supplement CO2 and you're going to bombard your plants with a lot of light, 900 ppfd, that's the minimum size footprint and the maximum light intensity that we recommend. Now you can actually go even more intense light than that, but at 900 ppfd without CO2 supplementation, you're going to start seeing bleaching in the plants. So even if you are running CO2 supplementation, 900 ppfd is kind of the maximum safe level of light that you can give to your plants, because if your CO2 bottle runs out and you're gone for a day, you don't want to bleach your plants out and harm them with too much light, because you can ruin an entire crop very quickly if you give it too much fertilizer, too much light, whatever. So 900 ppfd is the maximum we recommend as far as the safe level of light. You can go above that. If you are absolutely certain that your CO2 is never going to cut out and you're always going to maintain 1200 parts per million, 1500 parts per million, you can go to higher light intensity levels and slightly smaller footprints with our light, and that will work. But if anything goes wrong, if your CO2 cuts out or you don't fertilize one day, your plants are going to be dead.
Well, that's something we'll be able to teach. You know, now we can explain it to somebody when they're trying to, that footprint idea is something that's constantly brought up amongst in the debate. Yep. So thank you for that explanation. You opened my eyes a little bit on that too, about what you're saying about, and of course it's light intensity. The bigger the footprint, the farther away, the less light intensity.
Exactly.
Right? The smaller the footprint, the lower you get it down there, and then only to a certain point, which is all on your website, right? All the recommended values we're talking about. So I can say, go there and look at the website. You can see for yourself.
We even have a table on our website where if you're looking for a particular ppfd level over the entire footprint, you can look up what size footprint each of our size lights will cover at that average footprint and what height you'd need to hang it at to cover that. So if you're looking to get 1000 ppfd, you can look that up and you can see with all 5 sizes of our lights exactly how big the footprint would be.
That'd be a good thing to post on the comment section too, for people, because they're going to be looking at that. That's a big deal right there.
Yeah, I actually just checked it out earlier in the show when we were talking. And the what do you call it? The infrared shots were really cool. I was looking at those.
Nice website.
Checking out your website. So lots of good content on there if you guys haven't checked that out. I think it's just blackdogled.com. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And we pride ourselves. I think we've got more information on our website than almost any other lighting company, whether it's LED or any kind of lighting company. We try and educate people as much as possible so that they can make the best choices possible.
Yeah, it's a real nice site. At least with American companies trying to, do like you guys are doing, assemble as much as you can here, and try to have a little bit more honesty about those types of things, because it helps ultimately sell your product. And that why it costs more money is it's not just because you want to like buy a boat and retire in the Hamptons or something like that. Like, it really is a better grow light, and there's reasons why, and it's tested. And so I definitely feel like all this information helps explain a lot of the things that maybe some of us already know, but for just people that are like, I want to buy a light and grow some plants, like okay, well, you can do that, in adjusting expectations accordingly, and having somebody explain it so eloquently as you did will be a great resource to, like Roger was saying, point people in that direction and different things like that. So appreciate that.
We had another question from someone watching. Can you touch on it all about increased light intensity and during veg to boost CBD? I know that CBD is primarily produced in veg, or at least more heavily produced in veg. Do you want to touch a little bit on that? I know your lights are pretty intense, and if someone's doing CBD, they might want to consider using the flowering footprint for their veg instead. Or is that something that you haven't heard?
So no, again, we have multiple different recommended footprints that we put up, and one is the maximum recommended footprint for vegetative growth, and that's at 200 ppfd average over the entire area. You can certainly veg with higher light levels, so any of the other, what we call the flowering footprints, are certainly usable with that. And on our website, we also try and explain too that all of these footprints that we're doing are for photoperiod sensitive cannabis plants. So our vegetative footprint is based on an 18-hour on time per day and a 6-hour dark period. And the reason that we're able to get away with 50% less light is literally because the light is on 50% more hours per day. So the plant itself is getting exactly the same total number of photons over the day with our maximum recommended veg footprint as with our maximum recommended flower footprint. But that's, again, assuming 18 hours a day for veg and 12 hours a day for flower. If you're doing auto-flowering cannabis plants, for example, you can use our maximum recommended veg footprint and get spectacular results with auto-flowering cannabis because you can have light on 18, 20 hours a day and get all the photons that the plant actually needs. Similarly, if you're looking to veg with increased light, you can use any of our smaller footprints. And what point more light becomes too much light starts depending on CO2 supplementation, as well as it's heavily genetic dependent. There's a lot of different strains out there. There's a lot of different kinds of plants out there where too much light becomes problematic at different points. And with veg especially, it's a little bit tricky. I mean, different plants respond very differently. Tomato plants, for example, if you give them 24 hours of light per day, they will die with that. Cannabis plants are very different. You can give them 24 hours of light per day. They won't die. I generally don't recommend it. I do believe that giving them a night period, even during veg, is beneficial to them, but they won't die. But a tomato plant, if you ever try growing a tomato plant with 24 hours a day of light, it will turn yellow. It will look nutrient deficient, even though you're giving it plenty of nutrients, and it will die on you. And it's because it's simply not getting a resting period at night. Similarly, light intensity is the same way. There's a period, because you're leaving the light on during veg for at least photoperiod sensitive cannabis plants 4 more hours per day. That means the plant is getting more photons per day than if you only had the light on at 12 hours per day. So it's fairly easy to know where you're getting too much with photoperiod sensitive cannabis plants in flower, because everyone's running 12 hours per day, and we always tested 12 hours per day. But with the veg period, it depends on how many hours per day you're running, as well as the intensity for each of those hours. So it gets a lot trickier to dictate how much is too much or how much is enough to get that increased CBD response. You'd have to actually test it out a lot yourself, but it's definitely something that we generally recommend. If you want a faster veg period, if you want stockier, more stout plants, you can increase the light level. And if you're looking to increase the CBD production, you can do it there with increased light intensity as well. But as far as giving a suggestion for how much more light, depends on how many hours per day you're running and what strain it is.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I was going to follow up with, did you have an opinion on the 24 hours thing or not? I know, especially for autos, some people like to just leave it on all the time, and I've always thought that, I agree with you that there is, certain hormones the plant only produces at nighttime, and it needs that in order to do its best as far as plant growth. So.
Same thing I do too. It has to have a resting period. You know, and I also believe root production is stronger on shorter photo periods and longer, you know, so that's why I preach no 24/0. Don't come to me with that, please.
Yeah, at least a couple hours a day of night is important for plants.
Don't tell people that. Now they want to go 22/2.
No, 24 is generally the maximum. I'm 20 on, 4 off is generally the maximum I recommend. But
yeah, I think the hard part is that you have people that'll go, I did all 24 and it didn't die and it turned out fine. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but
that's right.
Probably would have turned out better.
It's a matter.
You know what I mean? Like, how do you really, quantify that? So I think the experience is really the only thing that you can sort of like, unless you're going to like document everything all of the time, like either, doing it multiple ways yourself or witnessing other people doing it a different way. That's really about it. So, but in my personal opinion, kind of goes back to that same thing with the LED thing. A lot of that you have to first gauge whether or not the person can grow plants effectively. Like, is there documentation of healthy plants that have been produced at any point in time by the person that you're dealing with? And then you can adjust the conversation as necessary.
Right.
Yep. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, we'll let Kevin go unless he wants to stick with us for the rest of the thing. He's an hour behind us, so it's 9:05.
I had a question real quick.
Sure.
Is there an optimum leaf surface temperature across the board, no matter what light you're using? And if so, what is it? And I also heard you talk on CO2 a little bit in relation to that. If you could kind of elaborate a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. Unfortunately, no, there is no optimal leaf surface temperature. It varies dramatically from one type of plant to the next. So a lot of plants are adapted to different environments. You've got a lot of to pick some extremes, you've got cactus that are adapted to desert environments that actually close up their stomata entirely during the day, use what's called a crassulacean acid metabolism, so they don't waste water during the day, and they only open up their pores at night. And they have a dramatically different ideal leaf temperature than something that's adapted to Arctic conditions, where it never gets above 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of summer. And so that plant has evolved to have a much higher metabolism at a much colder temperature. So it varies dramatically depending on what type of plant it is. With cannabis plants, I think it also depends a lot on the strain, but from what we've seen, it's roughly 88 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal leaf surface temperature that we have seen with cannabis plants, and that's based on taking forward-looking infrared camera pictures of leaves in grows and then seeing when we actually harvest, did that grow do well? Did the yield get what we expect, or did we think it could have done better? And we've definitely seen ourselves many times that if you keep the cannabis leaves less than 88 degrees, you're starting to hurt the yield of the plants and you won't get the maximum potential out of them. And that's without CO2 supplementation. So when you do start supplementing CO2, as a lot of people do in a lot of grows, you're doing that because plants have 3 things they need, and they all need to be in balance to be able to grow well. And one is nutrients, one is CO2, and the other is light. And if you have an abundance of nutrients and CO2, but you don't have enough light, the plant's not going to grow as well as if everything was properly in balance. So when you increase CO2, you actually can increase your nutrient level, you can increase your light level. You're basically putting the plant into overdrive at that point, and that's actually increasing the metabolic temperature, which is ideal to do that because chemical reactions happen faster at warmer temperatures. So if you're only just barely feeding your plant and you're just barely giving it light, you actually want to keep it cooler so that it's not starving itself to death trying to eat through all of its sugars by having a high metabolism. At the same time, if you're feeding it in abundance with CO2, with light, and with nutrients, then you actually want to keep it warmer so that it can have all these chemical processes happen faster. So that's where with CO2, we actually recommend about 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, and that applies regardless of whether it's high pressure sodium or LED lights. You'd run 5 degrees warmer with CO2 supplementation than you would without CO2 supplementation. So with our lights for cannabis, we actually recommend 85 degrees as the ideal ambient room temperature if you're not supplementing CO2, and 88 to 90 degrees as the ideal temperature if you are supplementing CO2.
Awesome. That answered my question perfectly. Thank you very much.
Certainly.
We had a question from chat. Hold on, where is it? Oh, does Black Dog plan to put out a design without any moving parts?
So I kind of addressed that earlier. So we deliberately include the fans in our lights because the enemy of LEDs is heat. We know that we could put out an LED light fixture without moving parts. The reason we don't do that is because the cooler you keep the LEDs, the more efficiently they run, the more photons they put out per watt you put in, as well as it increases the longevity, lifespan of the LEDs. So we actively cool our LEDs specifically to maximize efficiency, get you more photons per watt, as well as increase the lifespan of the LED. So we could put out a light fixture that didn't have any moving parts, but it wouldn't be as efficient and it wouldn't last as long, and we don't think that's a fair trade-off. That's why we have redundant fans in our lights. If one of them breaks, no big deal, the light keeps working. In our larger lights, if 2 of the fans break, no big deal, the light keeps working. We've got redundant parts in there. And you can always get those parts replaced. Everything's covered under a 5-year warranty, and the fans themselves are actually rated to last longer than the LEDs will. So we just don't see failures of fans in the field, and people are concerned about moving parts, and other companies advertise their lights as having no moving parts to break, and it's true, they don't have any moving parts to break, but they're less efficient and they won't last as long, and I don't think that's a good trade-off.
That was a super good explanation. Thanks. That was really good. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions that we have. Unless you have anything else you want to touch on. If not, thanks a lot for coming on the show. If anyone's curious, all of his social media information, links to their website and everything is in the description. If you want to tell people how to find you or your website and stuff, go ahead and tell people how to get you.
We're at blackdogled.com. We've got a YouTube channel. We've got Facebook. I'm actually not the best at social media. I guess you could call me anti-social in that respect. But you can find all of our social media links and all the information off our website at blackdogled.com. We've got a ton of information, including all sorts of very cool forward-looking infrared camera pictures of different plants under different light spectrums on our website. We've got a ton of spectral graphs on our website and all sorts of information on how to use our lights in different situations. And unlike a lot of other light companies that will just tell you, okay, here's the light, here's the footprint, we know that that's not how growers really grow, or at least that's not how growers really should grow, because every situation is different. It really depends on how hard you're pushing your plants with nutrients, how much you're feeding your fish, for example, what your water chemistry is like. You might need different light levels, so we try and provide information about all of that on our website, and it's actually way more than I could possibly cover in a webcast like this. But it's all available on our website.
I have one more question for you.
Yep.
What do you have like testing right now? What do you have that's like new that you're maybe you aren't sure about yet, or you don't have a product for, but what do you have in the pipeline?
So basically, once we release a light or a version of lights, we immediately start work on the next version of lights. We made a pretty dramatic jump with our latest lights, the Phytomax 2. We were able to massively increase efficiency, both through increases in LED technology and LED efficiency based on research that all of the LED manufacturers are doing, as well as we changed what packaging we were using with the LEDs. So our LEDs now actually have glass lenses on them, which means they are not only protected from the environment by those glass lenses, but they're also mechanically protected and electronically protected by those glass lenses. And you can actually clean them with a towel and glass cleaner if you want. So that allowed us to actually get rid of the protective layer of glass that we had under our LEDs, and that almost every LED grow light on the planet has under its LEDs. And that protective layer of glass, even when it's perfectly clean, is stealing 8 to 10% of the total light output. And bad news is, as soon as you hang it in your grow, it's not perfectly clean. And within days, it's far from perfectly clean. So by getting rid of that entirely, we've been able to dramatically increase the amount of light that we can deliver to your plants per watt that you put in. I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to have that dramatic an increase in efficiency again with any of our new lights, but we're constantly working on and experimenting with and testing out new types of LEDs and what we might be able to do with our next light. So yes, we're working on new stuff. It always takes a lot longer than it should to get a new product out because we're very demanding. We test it for a very long time to make sure it's going to work. We're one of the few LED companies, LED grow light companies in the world that's actually been around longer than the warranty we offer on our lights. And there's a good reason for that. It's actually pretty easy to make an LED grow light and come up with something that you can sell that actually works for a month at least, but it's actually very difficult to make something that will work in the long term. That's why you see a lot of LED grow light companies come onto the market, they make a big splash, all sorts of wild claims, and then 3 months later the company's dead, and it doesn't matter what warranty they were offering. They don't exist anymore to back it up, so it doesn't matter if they were offering a 10-year warranty, you can't get warranty service on that. And there's only a very small handful of LED grow light companies that have been out longer than we are. We want to make sure we're not going to go the way of the dodo anytime soon. So we do extensive testing on all of our new lights, and things that I think we should be able to get out a new light fixture in 3 months always ends up taking more like 12 to 18 months. So as much as I'd love to say that we're going to have new lights coming out in a few months, it won't be until next year at the earliest, if we're lucky.
And you won't tell me what you're testing either, right? I see.
So we're constantly testing different spectrums, although we've been playing around with that for enough time that we're pretty confident the spectrum we've got now is as close to ideal as we can get. We've made changes to it and tested it before, and the reason we're using the spectrum we're using now is because it's the one that consistently does the best for us, not just with cannabis. I mean, that's what we test it with and that's what we design it for, but it actually works pretty well across the board for anything that you're growing specifically for leaves or flowers. I mentioned earlier that we specifically tune our spectrum to help decrease internodal spacing and decrease stem length. So if you're looking to grow bamboo or celery, our light is not the light you want because you'll end up with really stocky celery, and that's not what people want with celery or bamboo. So I don't think the spectrum is going to change, but we're always constantly testing things with regard to the spectrum. We're testing out different methods of cooling, always looking at better ways of doing power conversion. It's across the board. We're always constantly looking at things, and we always choose the best of what we're able to put together to put into our new lights. And then there's the fun tests on the side, which have nothing to do with lights, but just different growing methodologies, things like the 8-day week and defoliation versus non-defoliation and all sorts of fun tests. But those are distractions, really.
Have you tested?
There's another polarizing one, the defoliate.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on that? Do you want to touch on that one, the defoliating? Or?
No, it's not. It's a can of worms.
So we have personally grown both defoliating plants and non-defoliating plants, the best yields we've ever gotten. And it's not a fair test because we changed to our new lights, which are definitely much better than our older light version in terms of grams of light output per watt. So I would expect a massive yield increase from that, but also the first test grows we did with our new lights, we did with defoliation, and the yields were even higher than we would have expected. So I think defoliation definitely might have something to it. We're doing another follow-up test because of that right now, where we've got 4 plants in a tent, 2 we defoliated, 2 we didn't. That test already is not entirely fair because the 2 plants that weren't defoliated shaded out the plants that were defoliated simply because they still had leaves. So we're going to have to redo that one again to test and see which one it is. But it's funny because right now the plants that were defoliated look to have smaller buds. The colas on the top are definitely noticeably smaller than the plants that weren't defoliated. However, they have bigger buds further down on the plant than the plants that weren't defoliated. So overall, I think the defoliated plants are still going to win. We won't find out for about 3-4 more weeks when we finally pull down and get everything dried up and weighed up. But it's one of those. Yeah, we only ever consider dry weight. We don't do wet weight. But the plants that weren't defoliated, the top colas definitely look larger. But I do believe that's an optical illusion. When you take a look further down on the colas, I think the plants that were defoliated are going to have more total weight. Now, the colas themselves aren't going to be as large around at the top, but they're definitely taller overall and more consistent in width for that height than the plants that were defoliated.
I always thought it'd be interesting to just like blast the whole plant and do the total weight of the extracted, because you're really growing resin, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, you know, whether we're talking about the bulk of the plant material on the bud versus the, I mean, yeah, it does give it more surface area. If it's a bigger bud, it's going to be more covered in resin and all that. But ultimately, if you extract everything that you can through the same extraction process, then it would be able to tell you, regardless of the size of the bud or whether it was the top or the bottom or wherever it grew, and then was extracted. So I don't have the means to do that, but I always thought it would be fun.
Yeah, and that's one of the tests we'd love to do as well, because we definitely always consistently notice that with our spectrum, we get not only more trichomes on the top of the colas, but also more trichomes on lower leaves than you get with a spectrum that doesn't have ultraviolet and UV in it. I'm sorry, ultraviolet and deep blue in it. And I think that's because of the better penetration down to lower leaves. The ultraviolet definitely triggers a lot more trichomes on every leaf. And I think the extraction yields, if you were to just extract the entire plant, would definitely be noticeably different just based on the spectrum the plant was grown with. In terms of defoliation, when you're pulling all the large leaves off, that's dramatically increasing penetration further down in the canopy, and that is distinctly noticeable when you're looking at the buds. You're essentially hurting the buds on top, but dramatically helping the buds on the bottom, and that's where I was talking about the colas getting skinnier, but much, much taller and more consistent in their width throughout the whole thing. And that also translates to trichomes. You get even more trichome production lower on the plant. I can tell you from commercial facilities I've been in, by far, hands down, not even a close competition, the highest yield I've ever seen has been from a commercial facility that consistently always defoliates their plants. So I do think there's definitely something to it.
Awesome. That was a good one to. Again, you're welcome to stay as long as you want. I was just trying to let you go if you wanted to. So you've given so many amazing explanations. I almost just want to keep you here all night and keep telling us stuff.
Well, it's always fun getting with other growers and having a chat, because there's so much fun information. You can always learn so much from each other.
True. I learned a lot. I know I learned a lot.
Yeah. Sorry, Steve.
Oh, no, you're fine. I know I've learned a lot tonight, especially about the VPD being different for LEDs. I had no idea.
So the VPD, as defined in terms of leaf temperature versus ambient temperature, is the same, but in terms of the approximation they use for VPD charts, which is based purely on ambient temperature, that's very different.
Sorry, I was running the blowtorch for my dab rig. But yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love to have you on the show again sometime.
Anytime.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Thanks, Kevin. That was great.
Thank you again. That was wonderful.
Yep. Happy to be here.
All right.
Steve, what are you doing? Oh, I thought you disconnected or something. So, Brain, you've been quiet over there. What have you been up to?
In the grow, just what I've been working on.
Yeah, what you working on?
I actually just uploaded a video. I think it was today, no, yesterday, of a sand filter for my rainwater.
Nice.
And I actually had some pretty interesting results with that, because I have access to well water, and when I tested the well water, well, first off, I was using the well water just to clean out all of the dirt and extra debris that would water, you know. And
Right.
when I tested the well water, the pH was at about 8.2 or so. And after the water started running clear, I decided on a whim to do a pH test, and actually noticed that apparently the sand filter removed some of the calcium carbonates from the water, because the pH had actually dropped to 8.0 at that point. So I was actually very intrigued by that. And then also, today I was working on my dry sift screens. I finally went to the hardware store and got me some contact cement so I can make those look a little bit nicer. So hopefully I'll be making a video on those here pretty soon as well. But I would definitely recommend everybody to go check out that video on the sand filter, because I included test data on water that had actually pH'd at 8.8 and got that to drop all the way down to like 7.9. So it was pretty crazy.
I know the sand filters too, you know, depending on what type of sand you're using, will also increase your silica while it's being filtered.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to add some green sand in there as well, because I know that would have added trace amounts of potassium content to the water as well, but I wasn't able to find any of that. I mean, maybe I'll make another one later on down the line that has green sand in it. But just, I mean, I was simply using at the bottom of the sand filter, it's just gravel that I had just laying outside in my yard, you know. And then I added a layer of biochar, you know, not even a quarter-inch thick, just a layer to have a carbon layer in there. And then on top of that, I just put play sand. And that's just what the bag said. You know, it wasn't necessarily coarse sand or fine sand. It was play sand, and it actually had a whole bunch of small rocks in it. But I was pretty surprised to see that it would actually remove carbonates from the water, you know, and drop the pH on it.
Well, the other thing too, if you put an air stone in it, it probably wouldn't crash. When you have still water that's not moving or flowing, the carbonates will drop out.
Yeah, I do. I actually do have an air stone in there too, so that probably did, I guess, as you mentioned, play a role as well.
Okay.
I think, you know, a lot of it's probably going to change your buffer going through the sand filter, right? So it makes it, you know, have less buffer, so it makes it easier to change the pH, right?
Yeah, the biochar will be pretty acidic when it goes through that, and it'll help.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about as well.
But in general, though, sand filters, if you don't have that biochar layer, you know, you will, in general, will raise the pH or, you know, mineralize it to an extent.
I find it's always more fun when you build something like that and you observe something and then start looking for ways to explain what you already know. You know what the results are. You're just, you know, trying to figure out why it is.
Trying to figure exactly where it's happening.
Yeah, it's always a fun experience approaching it that way. And then, you know, sometimes when you're just problem solving, it's, you know, about getting problem solved, but going the other way is always fun. And the filters,
yeah,
cool.
and then,
you know, the sand filters, obviously, you know, people have been using those for a long time. They actually, my family, that I don't know if you're in the Facebook growers group, but or the Aquaponic Cannabis growers group on Facebook. And I posted a picture of all that horsetail fern, which is on my family's homestead, and their original gravity-fed irrigation system was all dug. It's like 2.5 miles worth of ditch that was like hand dug over to the creek. And then it, partway like up above where all the irrigation started, they had like an inline filter basically that they built that same way, where they had a little settling pond, and coming out of that they had, you know, layers of essentially that same thing, the different types of sand, and they just used like creek sand, you know, instead of your like gravel, and they have gravel and then homemade biochar, essentially. Probably not necessarily biochar as much, just charcoal, but you know, but just an old time way of doing a filtration and then out to the field. So it's always cool to see a lot of those same, I don't know, ideas transferring over a very long time. It's definitely proven technology, we'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually surprised at how well it worked. So I don't know.
Hey,
My mind was blown. Totally.
Brain grow for the newer growers out there that are considering aquaponics and they're trying to catch up with, you know, you're talking about the sand filter and all that. And then you mentioned, well, next time you want to try some, a combination of some green sand, could you please explain the green sand? Why would that be beneficial?
Well, the green sand actually has trace amounts of potassium in there as well. So that's why that would help out. It has 0 nitrogen, 0 potassium, but an added trace amount of potassium.
Okay.
It also has iron in it as well. It's often used for orchids or violets or certain kinds of flowers really like to get pulled there. The iron and potassium, and it also has high in silica as well. So you kind of get, you know, all those. But except for the downside is that the iron is very low bioavailability. Very little of it is actually plant usable, which is the downside to it. So
does that affect? How's that affect the fish?
it won't affect them.
It doesn't affect them negatively at all.
Yeah, you'd have to go pretty crazy with it in order to spike it.
Yeah, in which, I mean, you could probably dump a whole freaking bucket of green sand at the bottom of your reservoir and nothing would happen, because it's like very slow release anyway, like super slow. So I was thinking that would have been pretty awesome to be able to get that into my sand filter. And I'm definitely going to do that in the future, because I want to be able to benefit from that.
So are you using it inline, like in your system, or are you just using it to treat water separately?
Yeah, right now I'm using it to treat water separately. What I was also actually working on is a first flush diverter for your rainwater. And what that basically does is, with the first flush of rain, it basically rinses off your roof and rinses all the debris down your gutter. And you're basically putting the design that I imitated in mine is you're using a 4-inch PVC pipe that to a 2-inch pipe, and the 2-inch pipe is actually plenty of room for the water to flow. And it's as simple as putting a plastic water bottle inside that pipe and putting a screw off, I don't know what, a screw off cap where you can screw it on and off on the bottom side, and that will fill up with water. And as it fills up, that's all of the nasty water that has all the junk from your roof on it, you know, that will fill up, and then it gets plugged up by the water bottle, and then your rain starts diverting into a separate container that is mostly, 90% clean, just really clean rainwater. And you can see the difference. Like I said, I barely put mine together today, and I haven't installed it because I'm at the moment trying to figure out how I'm going to mount it, because it's actually some pretty heavy pipe. But I'm going to set up some reservoirs so I can hold that water, and then I want to set up also a sand filter in something that will hold the water that has been filtered, and something that holds the water before it's filtered. And that's just going to be for my home water supply. You know, I want to, as soon as I can get that squared away, I want to plant a garden. I don't know how much time I'm going to have left in the year, but I want to do an outdoor garden. And I've already talked about how I want to do an outdoor aquaponic system, but I'm trying to get my water situation fixed up in that regard. So
for sure, especially outdoor, because you're going to be, you know, I mean, obviously, it kind of depends on how you set it up, but generally, you're dealing with a large amount of temperature change, especially in the summertime. So, you know, there's usually, even if you have your tanks covered, your plants are going to be, you know, using a lot of water just to grow and survive the heat. So, you know, you're going to be, you know, adding a lot more water into your system, which means, you know, especially if you're dealing with well water, because this is basically, I mean, that's my scenario. My well water comes out like 8.4, you know, so I know that when I'm adding more water, I'm going to have to be treating more often, or, you know, however you do it, like, you know, on one system I have it set up where it's got a tank right next to it, so I can just fill it up with water and treat it however I want, and then pump that water into the system. But my other ones, I just add water and then adjust it with, you know, either phosphoric acid, or most of the time, if I'm just topping off tanks, it's not a big deal. But on the outdoor ones, you get to topping it off like once every couple of days because you're using so much water. Especially if you're like me, I have small systems, so, you know, my tank doesn't have a lot of volume, which means it doesn't hold water as much. So just some thoughts for outdoor for you.
Well, while on the subject of
definitely.
pH being, you know, I'm lucky I got pH of 7 to 7.2 well water. So, you know, while we're on that subject, though, why don't you tell all the newer aquaponics, aspiring aquaponics people, what's the proper pH you want to keep your fish or your, you know, crustaceans, I guess, at?
Well, as far as fish go, they generally prefer a more alkaline pH as opposed to plants. So we in aquaponics, it's really a compromise. I think most people try to keep it around 6.5 to 7 in aquaponics.
Okay, so if you're neutral, you're good to go.
Yep,
So my well water would be just perfect.
I try to hold mine at 6.6 because that's the point where you have the biggest nutrient availability for the upper pH ranges.
Yeah. There you go, 6.6 then. So it's basically you just wanted to keep it around that 6.5 to 6.7 range. Like
and you really have to know like what's in your water that's causing it to, you know, like if it's high, like well water, like mine, you know, it's a good idea to get it tested so you know what you're dealing with. Like I know I have a lot of calcium carbonate that comes in my well water. So, you know, for me, it makes a lot of sense to add very small amounts of phosphoric acid over time. And that just happens to be what works out the best for me. Now I have used, was it fulvic acid and muriatic acid, I think it is. I've used all of them before with success. I've even used citric acid before, which I know, you know, everybody blows up about, but assuming that you can, you know, measure properly, it can be done. It has been done. I killed nothing. So anyway, all of those different things, you know, sort of play into it. So if your well water isn't high in calcium carbonate, say it's high in something else because you're on city water, or what's that, Steve?
Sodium,
right? You know, there's different things that you have to do to treat it. But once you figure out what your base is, what you're starting with, and a lot of times, like if you bought your house, usually they have to provide you, you know, well water testing anyway. So it might be as easy as just looking in the papers from when you bought your house if you're on well water, and you'll have at least a basic idea of what it is. You know, if it's really high in iron, for instance, you know, that, you know, you might even want to do a little bit further testing to find out, you know, exactly what it is, like an agricultural test. But the point is find out what you're dealing with to start with, and then you can, you know, play around with it if you want to, or, you know, allow it to adjust over time. But a lot of times you'll need to add stuff to buffer it if it's crashing. Like, you know, you're saying yours is coming out at, Roger, you said you were coming out at like 7.6 or 7.2 or something like that?
Basically neutral, just slightly alkaline.
Right.
7.2 maybe, and about 200 parts per million. So I do have iron, and I have chlorine. I know, because the tips of my cucumbers were a little bit white, just a very, very light little white line. And talked to my boy that taught me how hydroponics from South Africa, and he said, "Oh, that's chlorine. No worries, as long as it's just around the edge, it's all right. Just means you got chlorine in your water. We don't need to put it in your mix then." So when we made my mix for here, there's absolutely, you know, I don't know if I'd want to have chlorine in anyway. I don't know that. I guess that's, you know, if you've made a nutrient, but if the nutrients that I make from scratch don't have chlorine, because I have a little bit in the water, you know, and I had very little iron too, maybe 2 to 3 parts per million. But now I'm starting to think I might be smart. You know, I'm getting, you know, smarter sometimes. It was so nice, and the water was so nice, and the plants, everything grows like freaking crazy. So you got to say, well, there's nothing wrong with the water, because you can chop a tree down here and it'll grow a sprout out of the side of the freaking trunk and grow again. So I never did do the ag test on it, because everything was really going great. But I really do, more and more. Well, part of it's, you know, sometimes even that few bucks you couldn't afford. And so I think a lot of people can relate to that when times are tough. $20 or $40, whatever it costs to send it off to Clemson, or, you know, one of the state universities, or the agricultural, your local agriculture county agent. That's what I was trying to get at. The county agents, you know, you have that kind of situation where you just can't afford. But I think I'm going to do it. I think I want to go ahead and get that done, because now you guys got me. Because I've got everything here I pretty much need to build an aquaponic system without. I mean, I'm gonna have to go buy stuff. You always have to go. You know, if you think you're not gonna have to go buy stuff, you're delusional. But I've got tons of stuff. Pumps. I got all kinds of aeration pumps. I got commercial aeration pumps, and Joe homeowner aeration pumps, and I got all kinds of plumbing laying around, and tubing, and all kind of stuff. You know, and I build my own systems a lot too. So, you know, I'm looking forward to it. So that's why I'm now really interested, because you got to keep the fish alive, right? So it goes a little beyond.
Just get some goldfish from the pet store, you know, like the feeder ones.
Yeah, grab a
you know, some of them might swim a little sideways or whatever to start with, you know, no big deal. They're like a quarter. That way, if you kill them, no big deal.
Yeah, well, I'll probably start with a little bit bigger system than most beginners would start with, because I got a hydroponic farm and I got some reservoirs sitting around, and I'm, you know.
They'll have tons of feeders, right, Steve?
Oh, just keep buying them, you mean? Yeah.
Right.
Steve knows. They'll have plenty. You want to get a lot of fish in a hurry.
Oh yeah. Well, here's the deal. So you can do that, but this is the key to making sure they don't all die, whether they're guppies or goldfish. You need to salt dip them. If you don't salt dip your fish, you will have problems.
What's that? So explain salt dipping to me.
So for people who don't know, if you get new fish, you know, you always want to quarantine them. But before you, but before you put them into quarantine, what you want to do is take a 1 gallon or 5 gallon bucket rather, or if they're bigger fish, you know, you're going to obviously dose to the same scale, and put 1 to 1.2 pounds of aquarium salt in the 5 gallon bucket, the kind you get for saltwater fish at the store. Super cheap.
1.5 pounds to a 5 gallon bucket.
No, 1 pound.
1 pound to 5 gallons.
Yeah, 1 pound to 1.2 pounds.
Okay.
And then put that in a 5 gallon bucket, and then you're going to fill it up with water, and then you're going to put the fish in there for 60 to 90 seconds, and the fish will swim near the surface. They'll look a little funny. They might slow down a little bit. They might breathe a little quickly, but it won't harm them at all. It might stress them out just a little bit. But what it'll do is this difference in salinity will kill any bacterial pathogens on them, any fish lice, ick. If they have a bacterial infection because of a wound from being transported, it'll clean the wound and make sure that they don't get a secondary infection. If they have fungal infections, it'll kill that as well. If they have flukes, it'll make the flukes come out, especially when you get flukes that get behind the eyeballs. That they can't stand the salinity, and they'll come out from behind the eyeballs of the fish. It's kind of disturbing to watch, but I've seen that happen before too. and all different kinds of things where it'll kill anything external and aid in the healing if you have a wounded fish. I'm doing that once a day, but making sure you do that before you transfer them into quarantine, or before you put them into your final system, will definitely dramatically reduce your chances of problems, especially with problematic fish like feeder fish.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, see, that's what I figured you were getting at. That's similar to like dipping your clones in purethrin bath. I know they used to do commonly.
I've done that a bunch for treating to have a much lower mortality rate on our feeder fish at pet stores. You can take a pet store that doesn't know about it, and suddenly like they have to buy like a quarter as many feeder fish. So, but yeah, it's a good trick for that.
So you say what's the best fish? Well, I've got access to tilapia, and also we've already kind of gone over that. I think in this area, I got trout, tilapia, and I could get koi, goldfish.
Koi are the easiest starter fish for sure. The most bulletproof anyway.
Koi.
You can over.
Besides
you can
goldfish, because goldfish also they're pretty hardy fish.
You can overdose with stuff pretty hardcore and screw up quite a bit and have heaters fail and things like that. And in general, they'll survive. They might break out nick or something, but it's treatable easily.
Yeah, when we moved here, there were koi. There was a pond with koi, and they eventually died. But they were alive with ice over the water. I mean, they were in the middle of winter, like when we had an ice storm, which is rare. But it's coming more and more now. Year after year, we got weirder and weirder winter, crazy shit going on. But I'm saying, I went, my God, they're alive in there, like an inch of ice over top of it. I thought they were tropical fish that would kill them, and no, they're pretty bulletproof. But you can't eat. You don't raise them to eat them. You're basically in for the long haul, just to use them for nitrogen, right?
Yeah, that or just flip them. They gain quite a bit of money, especially if you do butterfly, koi, or some of the other ones. They're going to gain a lot of money. Per
a
year.
lot of value.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like sell them as a fish for somebody's aquarium?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You could start, instead of eating them as a market, you could sell them as a pet.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I found it was a much more active market than because I had no idea. I never cared, honestly, about fish or pet fish or basically I enjoyed fishing, like steelhead. Really like steelhead, salmon. I'm a big fan of sushi. Aside from that, that was like my knowledge of fish. And so now I have some pretty good sized koi and started checking into it. And even here locally, like pretty much anywhere, I would think here in the United States, you can bring up just a Craigslist, type in koi, and you'll find people selling, buying, relatively large market that I had no idea. And some of mine are getting pretty big. Like Donald Trump, we talked about him. I have a fish named Donald Trump because he kills anything that doesn't look like him. And like anything that I put in there, like even if it's a different, the goldfish that have like the big eyes, what are they called, Steve?
The plecos?
I don't know.
The bubble eye
goldfish.
goldfish.
They're
I think
goldfish,
that's just
but
what
they
they're
have
called.
big eyes.
Wait, what are they?
They're just a different kind of goldfish, but they have like two big old eyes on the front.
Oh yeah, the bubble eyes or kaleidoscopes.
Whatever you call them. Anyway, the kids really like those. And so we got like 6 of them, and he like popped their eyeballs, like he smashed them against the side of the tank. And like anything that doesn't, plecos, he hates plecos, smashes them against the side of the tank. Like anything that doesn't like look like a koi or just a straight up plain old goldfish, he like just smashes the shit out of it. It's weird.
That's crazy, man, because like all goldfish that I have are super peaceful and get along awesomely.
He's easily, well, I don't know, it might even be a sheep, fuck if I know. But they're like, it's a good sized koi. It's easily the biggest one in the tank and has been for a while. And it's got a big orange patch on its head. So that's another reason that we call it Donald Trump. But But yeah, it's weird. It's the only one that I've seen do that. I've seen catfish do that when their tank gets really like warms up and they start breeding. They start fighting over egg sacs and stuff like that, and they just fucking will fight to the death and kill each other. So that's the only time I've seen fish fight like that. But it just he has no problem with other koi or just straight up goldfish, that like just the feeder goldfish that we float around. He's got no problem with them. Big ones, even little ones. I put in like ones like this big, no problem. They can cruise around. He doesn't care, doesn't give a shit. But anything that isn't one of those two things, he'll just repeatedly smash against the side of the tank until it's dead, even if it takes like 2 or 3 days. It's ridiculous.
Well, do you ever consider maybe removing him from the tank so that you could have other fish?
Well, I have 4 different systems now, so I can, I'm more flexible in terms of, but all the koi and goldfish, and he's sort of like in the flower system. So only people that can get along with Donald Trump can go into the flower system. It's just how it works.
The older white male goldfish.
It's the white privilege tank. You really, you have to be on a certain level to get in. Please send all your complaints to steve@potentponics.com.
As always. It's okay. It's okay. What I do is anytime there's a word like a complaint word, I have a filter set up so it automatically forwards it to apmeds@gmail.com. Oh.
Talking Coyote Bros, what's up, man? Who is talking smack about aquaponics? He's in chat, by the way.
What's up, Coyote?
Hold on, I might have a surprise guest for us.
Who do we all have in chat tonight?
Coyote Grows is hanging out. A couple other guys were hanging out earlier, but I think they both left. Malik may still be here.
Was Malik out tonight?
Whatever you want to call him.
Well, if this works, we're going to have a super cool guest that I was not expecting to have on tonight that just randomly messaged me, and I said, hey, like, are you in a place? We'll see if it works or not. You may not even be able to make it work, but if somebody randomly joins, y'all will like it. So.
Oh, well, we're on the... Oh, go ahead.
What have you been up to, Marty?
Right now, I'm mad at Groma. Anyway.
You're what? You're mad at Groma? So, wait, what happened?
Apparently, he was talking smack about aquaponics. I'm going to have to quit recommending his channel. No, I'm just kidding.
We were going to get him on the show. What the fuck?
Wait. Who?
I'm waiting for a Coyote to answer.
Oh, was that recent? I'll have to...
I don't know. We'll wait for him to figure out. Anyway, aside from that, what have I been doing? Well, I've been filling a lot of fish tanks because it's 100 fucking bajillion degrees, and it's gonna be like 100 fucking bajillion plus 5 degrees tomorrow. So that's always fun. I messed around with I showed you guys last week. I don't have it here. I can't show you right now, but actually, I think it was the show before that, which was a long time ago. But anyway, I had the advanced nutrients, phosphoric acid, that I got a sample of, that I told you guys I was going to experiment with, and I finally did that today. And it is extremely strong. I'll put it that way. It's way stronger than anything I've used before. It is even stronger than the original straight pH down that I used to start with years ago, which was just General Hydro, which I think it's mostly phosphoric and a little bit of citric and maybe something else I don't remember now, but it's like a blend of 3 different ones. Anyway, the advanced nutrients is like straight phosphoric acid, and it's extremely strong. It doesn't take much at all to move even my bigger tank, which is still only 210 gallons or something like that. But Anyway, it's works extremely well, but it's very strong. So that's about the only thing that I'm doing is, and I'm using that because, like I talked about earlier, as it heats up and use more water and add more water, it's getting to be the start of the really hot time. So I just today I went through and drained all the tanks and did about I would say probably about a 60 to 70% water change. It really drops the temperature down, and then I end up having to readjust the pH after that. Except for the bigger system in back, which I have a separate tank and I treat it separately and get it where I want it to, and then pump one out, pump the other one in. So that's the kind of stuff that I've been up to. Other than that, and the flower room is a veg room right now. So everything has been moved into place. So it's just, I usually like to do about a week or two and make sure the plants are all good to go. And I really want to see how hot the room gets when it hits like 106 or whatever it's supposed to be tomorrow, and see how much it cools off. Because I run my lights at night. So, you know, obviously my grow lights aren't going to be on when it's 106 outside. But how much is it going to cool off from 106 when my lights kick on is going to be an issue. And I haven't gone through summer growing yet. Always been able to grow outside, which I definitely miss. Which if you haven't ever seen the show or heard me bitch about it, I can't, because I can't grow outdoor here because of regulations. So
that might change though. We covered this on the news show. There's a lawsuit going through based on some stuff that happened in California, and if that goes through, that might actually have, well, I might only apply to California. It might apply wider, but there's a lawsuit right now in California to overturn all the little local regulation bullshit.
Yeah. So I can't remember the name of it right now, but it obviously should affect other states besides California. But what always fails to happen, and we talk about this on the show before, is that you're going to rely on your local councils to interpret whatever comes down. And if your local council interprets it as, oh, we can still do whatever the fuck we want, then they're still going to do whatever the fuck they want and block it. So I've already decided that that's another thing I've been busy with, is fixing up some stuff around here, because we're going to be selling this place and moving to a county that has better regulations, essentially. So setting up to, actually, I think our first properties to look at are tomorrow. We already talked to a lender and all that stuff, and real estate agent, and gone through all that bullshit. But actually kind of looking forward to doing that, because I do miss growing outdoor. I mean, I have a bunch of vegetables and stuff outside and still utilizing the system, but I have plants in my garage that I could just toss in there right now and they would be huge at the end of the year. It just not take advantage of such a tremendous resource like the sun, like, physically hurts me after having taken advantage of it for so long. I mean, I still have like probably over a pound left from my outdoor personal stuff last year. Still going into this year. So I think, or not even going into this year, like now, after already gone through 6 months of the year. So I guess feeling the pain of having to only grow indoors, that I'm sure a lot of other people have too. Like there's plenty of people it's not even legal for them to grow. So sometimes I feel bad about bitching about it, but I wish everybody could grow outside. And I really don't understand the logic behind basically it's all based on my neighbor not wanting to smell it. And I really don't understand like how that becomes regulation. Like, how's that anybody's priority? Like, there's so many things that I could say that I don't like about my neighbor's house, but I have no method to stop them from doing it, because that is, impeding on their freedom and rights. And if it was anything besides cannabis, even if it was growing hops, you could not like the smell of poppies, but they're still there. I mean, people could still grow them. Like, if you don't like it, then go inside your house. Nobody's going to hold your hand over it or give you, on top of that, give you a way to enforce your belief on your neighbor. It's just not, in my opinion, not what America is about. And it really sucks to be experiencing that, like, as my plants should be growing right now. You know what I mean? Like, I knew it was going to happen, and it's been since last year that I've been bitching about it, but I don't think it like really set in until it's like, oh, these plants just sitting here in my garage, I'm going to chop a bunch of clones off of or something like that. They're, you know, they could be so much more in my aquaponic system, and they're not, basically because my neighbor doesn't want to smell them. Fucking blows.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So that's what I've been up to.
Garden. If someone had a flower garden and you get, you know, allergies and all, you know, I can't do anything about that, and that's actually a health issue.
Yeah, my wife's allergic to cedar pollen. It's not like I can have my neighbor tear out their cedar tree, and that has like actual implications, not just, you know, my neighbor needing a safe place for his nose. You know, like,
yep.
And we talked about this so many times, like, and most of these people, including my neighbor, who's like classic Republican asshole, would never want the government to regulate anything else, right? Like,
yeah, don't regulate or tell them anything or pay any fucking taxes for any poor people,
right,
or help a child
the fucking
eat
EPA.
every day. But don't
right?
let them grow no pot plants in the backyard. Yeah.
Right. Like, we don't want the EPA, you know, because that's even too much regulation. But I don't want to smell the pot plants or see the pot plants. Can't smell them or see them.
Yeah.
I mean, what is more fucking snowflake than that? You know what I mean?
You must have chosen the most fucked up place in Oregon to buy a house.
No, that's a lot of Oregon. Basically, what
has it got that way? Really? Oh yeah, because you got.
Yeah, I'm Southern Oregon, so the northern part of the state for sure.
Yeah, the Bend became the new Vail, Colorado.
Yeah, especially if you look at like basically from like the Eugene north I-5 corridor, sort of. Other than a couple of pockets in Eastern Oregon and in here in Southern Oregon, Rogue Valley, but for the most part, where legalization actually passed, if you look at it county by county, whether it's medical or any of them that have been voted on, it's all passed by the Portland metro area. That I-5 corridor, always votes yes, and everywhere else votes, maybe not overwhelmingly no. But I think even here, where we have so many growers here in the area where it's such an industry, you have a lot of people not voting no for various reasons. Some growers understood that they would probably fuck up a lot of shit. Like they did end up fucking up a lot of shit, and given the option would probably happily go back to the way it was in, 2014. But not an option, you know what I'm saying?
Wow. Yes, the sad part about the cannabis legislation that's going on, it's whoever gets voted in next term can change how it affects you and your ability to be a caregiver or have a dispensary or even grow outdoors in your own backyard on your own property.
Yep. This is why we rail on pretty much every week saying the biggest thing you need to do when they have a legalization bill is to make sure they cannot pull these bullshit little local regulations that are not based in science, fact, or reason.
Mr. Kevin Coyote.
I'm letting
He's just taken off from chat. He cleared it up. Apparently, there was no trash talk done by Grandma. It's been retracted. We'll clear it up later. But
okay.
Sounds like it.
God damn it, Coyote. Here you are. You're trying to start beef. You're going to get some kind of East Coast, West Coast thing going on with the other show. No, I'm just kidding.
East Coast.
No, I really want to get you guys on to do a joint show with all of them and get, we're gonna do something. We talked to them actually. I talked to them in person, 3 of them, while I was at the DGC Cup. So, including Groma. So we'll get them on.
Hey, Kevin was really good tonight. Great guest, Steve. Great guest.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah, he was super cool. Answered a lot of really awesome questions. Yeah, me too. That's why I was like, I could tell he was getting a little antsy. I was like, all right, we'll cut him loose. We've interrogated him enough for one night.
He hung out for a little while afterwards.
Yeah,
that's cool. And I do think it was cool that they do. I think both of our lighting guests at this point were very well informed, even if they didn't necessarily agree on what to do about it or how to tackle it. Both of them were well informed, well articulated themselves, and presented at least good information in how they interpret it. So kudos to both of them, and I think they both have high quality products.
Oh, yeah.
Usable information, and given all these people that are on this craze to buy LED lights now, why there's a reason that you pay a little bit more money to buy the right light that does the right job instead of something. I bought some of those $70 because I had so many guys on this forum because I work in the industry, so I bought a couple of them, and we tried to get some sponsorship to try to do it, but they wouldn't come off of it. But I bought a couple just so that, because I got 150, 200 guys that buy those $70 LEDs. The ones that say they're a 300 or 600. Oh, by the way, they get by with that. They say that's the model number, Marty. They say the Mars 300. Oops. The 300 watt model is a model number.
Well, they do it. They do it like 4 different ways. That's the really
I know.
Part. Like, we'll call it a model number, and some people will do that. The other ones say, okay, well, I have 600 1 watt LED diodes. Now, I'm not powering them at 1 watt, but there are 1 watt diodes, and there are 600 of them. So then, therefore, that means there's a 600 watt light, when really it's nowhere near that, right? Because of lots of reasons, but mostly that's the the other way that they sort of deceive you is that they say it's a 600 watt light because they say, okay, well, it's got this many number of of that many, but they don't power them at that. And you look at, so a lot of times they'll list like what their actual consumption is, right? That's or they'll say actual power consumption, or whatever. And you really, no matter what kind of light you are going to buy, if you're going to calculate like your watts per square foot, that's the number you need to use in comparison to other types of lights. So basically I won't say every, but I'll say 9 out of 10 LED grows that I've seen fail that have calculated a watts per square foot have done so based on not actual power consumption. And if you're not consuming the power, you're not producing the light from it. Just like we talked about, a watt is a watt is a watt. Right? If it's not coming out of the wall, then it's not getting turned into power. And so, I feel like that was another sort of misstep in a lot of growers coming from a single lamp growing method to an LED light. And we call it an LED light, but it's really LED lights, right? It's a whole string of diodes, and how you connect them together matters, and how you drive them matters, and how what kind of quality they are to start with matters. All that stuff that he talked about earlier. So I thought he did a good job of sort of like piecing all of that together and why it matters, even just as good or better than anybody we've had, I think.
Oh, well, that was great information. But what I was going to kind of get, we were in a kind of a lighthearted mood for a minute, and I took my 270. Well, I'm going to use them for my musical act. I'm going to hang them up on stage and use them, instead of growing with them. The 70 watt. I mean, I did use them a little bit. The plant actually seemed to like them. Actually, I used them as side lights under a 600 with a 600 watt HPS. And then I put those $70 LEDs on the side, and I can't say for sure because I didn't have a comparison like you'd like to say. You kind of addressed that earlier. But the thing is you kind of know when you look at plants and you've been growing for a long time, you kind of know what it does, and all of a sudden you go, well, I put this $70 light over here, and I tell you what, it's
yeah, and I guess I'm picky about it too, because up until now, like most of the strains that I've grown, I've always benchmarked them off of what they've done outside. Like, to me, the sun is like the ultimate benchmark, right? I mean, everybody's trying to essentially reproduce that inside. And so whatever I've been able to do outside, I've been able to compare that. And yeah, it's never going to be as good because nobody's recreated the sun. And I don't have a shit ton of money to spend on LED lights to really test all that stuff out. But that's always been, for me, like the benchmark is how well does it compare if I grow the same cut inside and outside and compare those across. That's always been a good benchmark for me in being able to do that. And so I have a couple of those cheap lights that I bought. Somebody had bought them and didn't like them, and I bought them off of eBay. And I've grown, I've grown nice plants with them. But again, you just know the difference when you compare that to like a ceramic metal halide or an HPS or whatever. And it's not I wouldn't even say it's a quality thing. I think that it's probably more of a yield mass question in terms of that. But I don't think it don't work at all. They definitely work, but it's just, again, a matter of, well, how much heat did you create off of it? Like, you're really maybe sort of splitting hairs, but there's a lot of hairs to split at that point. And some of them are expensive when you get to, larger scales, outside of home grow. Even I'm only going to get so much more efficient growing in my garage, and only having so many lights and so many plants. I can only make so much difference in the, $30 a month or whatever it is that I spend on power and food and nutrients or whatever else because of that. But when you scale that out to a lot bigger, it's not splitting hairs anymore. It's splitting costs, and those costs are bigger and all that stuff. So, again, I think that all that information you provided earlier was spot on and echoed a lot of stuff we heard before. And if you're thinking about especially commercial scale stuff, understand that it's not just splitting hairs. It's your actual cost. It's money that you're spending. And I think I mentioned before, I visited a couple of rec grows around here recently that have spent a lot of money on stuff that maybe wasn't terribly efficient for them, and it can be a pitfall. So I know a lot of people, listen to our show and talk to me about different ideas they have for doing larger scale stuff, and efficiency matters even more so once you get above the home grow sort of scale. Does that make sense?
Even some of the nutrients you use, you might change up. On a small scale, you can get away with just dosing potassium sulfate or potassium chloride, for example, to boost potassium. But when you get to the big scale, because you're dosing so much, you're far better off splitting the dosage between the two. You know what I mean? Just as one example. So, or using something like potassium silicate, as your main pH up, along with calcium carbonate instead of some of the others when you go scale up to maintain some of these things like silica that have a lower dissolvation rate. So over something like salicylic acid, which is very expensive, and you're dosing a 30,000 gallon system compared to potassium silicate.
Well, there's definitely different scales and different ways of going about doing things when you go from home in a room or a tent to a greenhouse or a farm. Definitely, for sure.
One of the questions I had recently from one of my patrons on Patreon was about CO2. So a lot of that stuff got answered by that too. So I think it's another one of those things that maybe doesn't matter as much on the small scale, but on a large scale definitely matters. And so a lot of that information about it, even if you don't need it right now, maybe bookmark this episode, and Steve, maybe we should add that to in the description that we cover that, because I don't think that's something we've covered as much in other episodes. But might be another thing for those guys looking to make that commercial step. He gave some really good information that was almost verbatim to what CO2 representatives give when I've asked them about, how to deal with it. Professional quality information right there. So if you're thinking about it in the future, if you don't do CO2 now, I know, Brandon, you were talking about it a little bit, had a little question about it too. And I don't know if you want to share some of your experience on it, but from what I've heard from other consultants, that was some pretty quality information.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was really, really good info today.
Yeah, one thing that really before he left was on the leaf surface temperature question that I asked him, because that, I don't think that's as common knowledge to growers as it probably should be, because I certainly didn't know that there was an optimal leaf surface temperature at which cannabis grows. So I definitely wanted to get that out there during the episode. And then with the addition of CO2, how he described it, that was great information.
Absolutely. I guess I should talk about what I'm doing, eh?
And
What do you do?
sure.
I'm in the process of moving north here in the next couple days.
You working on your greenhouse still?
Yeah, well, the greenhouse is up north, so once I get moved, I'll be able to actually go play. And,
I see. So you're back in San Diego right now?
Yeah, just packing. So
Cool.
yep, always running around. But I built myself a nice little stage, or not stage, but background. So I need to like hang some pot plant garland or something over the top.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm doing that, and then
You're bring one of those for all the regulars and send them to us, right?
yeah, I'll have a bunch of information on. I'm working on a bunch of really cool stuff for aquaponic cannabis growers, consolidating a bunch of products and tools that we use and talk about into one place, and that'll be coming soon. I can't talk more about that yet until I get up north and we get everything completely solidified, but everything's on schedule. And then we got a bunch of cool stuff coming up that I wish I could tell you more about that I can't at the moment. What else?
Did you ever get the dates for the class coming up? You said.
Oh yes. So we have a rough draft for the dates. We're just waiting to hear back. I'll have hopefully I'll get the email back tomorrow, and then I'll have dates out for the classes for the rest of the year, both for the online classes with me and Marty, and then we're also going to do a in-person class where if you guys want to come meet both Marty and I, we'll both be able to go down and do a joint class in person, depending on Marty's schedule.
Yeah, and at Ken's facility too, which I'm pretty excited about teaching at. That's obviously a step. It's like a whole set of stairs above my garage in terms of teaching capability. It's not even a step above. It's like there's an elevator or something, but it's a very nice facility. And so that's the same one that you've been posting a lot of different updates about on your channel, right? You want to talk about those a little bit?
Sure, yeah, I've been posting a bunch of different species videos. I had a couple people request, hey, can you just do a video on the different species or what does it look like when it's growing in aquaponics? So, I've been covering the different species. We did tot soy lately and the purple bok choy, which that purple bok choy is one of the beautiful leafy greens I think I've ever seen in terms of it's just like chromatic purple. It's just, wow. You can sit there and stare at it. It's just pleasurable to look at. So that's been kind of cool. I've been working with them on doing some more content. Yeah, I'll have some announcements once I move up there north, and we'll have more video content with them here in the future. Trying to think what else.
My raspberry is massive. It's like the one on the front porch. I get probably a handful of ripe raspberries off of it every day, and it's it's like taking over like probably a solid maybe 2 foot by 3 foot section of the grow bed. It's taken over now, and it's easily, the grow bed sits up off the ground a little ways, but it's easily above my reach in terms of the tallest branch gets whipped around in the wind and stuff. And it's just in a grow bed, and it's been there since last year, and I kept that system running. And but man, it's just going crazy. And I have an elderberry. That's another one that I put in the backyard system. So to replace the cannabis in the back, I have elderberry in a dual root zone, which is going crazy with fruit. And it was a cutting to start the year. So it's pretty crazy that it has as much fruit as it has now. I have a grape back there. I think it's a black grape. I don't remember. But that's another one I have back there. And then a few different watermelons that I put into the same system I grew cannabis in last year outdoors. So I have all that stuff. My son planted the watermelon seeds, so he's pretty happy about that. And we actually planted those right in the dual root zone. So we put the pot was already in place, and so we just planted right down in a dual root zone and went out every day and just sprayed them with a little water. And in about maybe 4 days or so, I think they popped up and started growing. So he's pretty excited about that. And I have 3 of them, 3 watermelon plants inside of one dual root zone pot, and I'm going to trade them all out over the gazebo and see how we can do with watermelons, because why not? Who doesn't love watermelon, right?
Right.
Do you have any place where you've taken pictures or done a little video of your outdoor aquaponics tree and grape and elderberry viney plant garden?
Yeah, it's on my YouTube. I haven't done one in a little while, but it's on my AP Meds channel on YouTube, and on my Patreon, I showed how we set up in the dual root zone setup in the backyard. I replaced one of the dual root zone setups and with a tomato. That's the other thing that's back there. So you can check that out on the Patreon if you want a more like how-to video on how to do it. But the YouTube videos, the same system I built last year, but for cannabis. So I think it's here, I can tell you. I think it's called Aquaponic OMMP Outdoor 2.0. So if you look at that playlist on my channel, it'll be the whole that whole grow from start to finish, the build video, all that stuff.
Okay. Well, I just thought everybody might like to see an update on all your grapes and your elderberry trees and all that stuff.
Yep. So there is one with that set up on the YouTube where they're pretty young, and I'll do it probably within the next week or so. I'll have update videos for the raspberry. The front porch is easier to do because I can just do it when I walk out there. I have to remember my phone when I go to the backyard, and that's difficult for a stoner.
I hear you. Well, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. I just wanted to request that.
For sure. It would go up anyway, but I'll put it up faster just for you.
Thank you. Well, you said I know it's not going to be overnight, but you're moving. So, I figured might be nice to see all that before you move, because it won't.
I haven't bought a house yet, so I do have a little bit of time. I'll get some videos done here before we go. So still got to find out. I'm looking at my first house tomorrow, and then I think we have like 3 more lined up next week, but we'll see how it goes.
Cool. Thanks.
So Steve, when are you gonna get your greenhouses going? I know you have like, did you say you had like 3 or 4 of them? You're gonna make one good one out of it or something like that?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'll have a video up on that tomorrow. I got it set to upload in the well, it's already uploaded. It'll unlock in the morning. Of the new greenhouse, and it's in a little rough shape right now, but we'll get it fixed up pretty quickly.
Cool.
So right now there's doves living in it, so I gotta chase them out too.
Extra nitrogen, bro.
Right. The biggest thing I need to do is get all the glass panels off the roof, and we have plastic panels to replace them with, because
I've never heard of pigeon in your IPM. That's a whole nother level.
That's what the P is, right?
Yeah.
Integrated pigeon management.
That sounds like you're managing the pigeons, though.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh shit.
So, but yeah, so I'll have that up. I also have a video, all my video series that I've been talking about and working on. And I'm gonna try and get a couple of those videos up so that they're queued up while I'm moving. So you guys have some cool content during that part. I have, I think, fish species. Shit, hold on. See if I have the thing open. Maybe you'll get lucky. Oh, 3 seconds here. I'll tell you what the first videos will be. First videos will be fish overview, planting methods, nutrient overview, and high nutrient systems versus low nutrient systems, depending on what you're growing. So those will be the first couple. And I'm gonna do one on Mulder's chart. That'll be another one I'll do in the beginning.
That's a fun chart.
Yeah, I realized the other day when I was looking for something that we've talked about that and linked it 3 or 4 episodes. So it's pretty good. Mulder's chart's a good way to balance.
Inevitably, are going to come up just more than once. There's so many times that we've talked about the same stuff over and over again, like whether it's regulations or molybdenum or any. I think we did remember we did the nutrients for every episode for a while, and we like ran out of nutrients. We're like,
Yep.
What are we gonna do?
Yep.
Yeah, but some of them come up over and over again, obviously, or the pH down questions, or pH up questions, or what to buffer with. Some of those things I think are just always going to come up over and over again, just because they should.
Mm-hmm.
pH is probably one of the few things that I check on a regular basis, almost religiously, just because I want to know where it's at, and what's going on with it. And so we've had. And the same thing happens in the groups, right? The aquaponics groups, get the same conversations over and over again. And a lot of them are about whether or not you should use pH, pH adjusters like acids to bring it down. Or I think earlier I saw somebody talking about how you should overfeed your fish to bring down your pH.
Yep.
And so not that won't work or whatever. It's just there are different ways of going about it. And I say the same thing about acid that I say on the Facebook groups or anywhere else we talked about a little bit earlier, which is I have one question for you if you want to use
a 10 strip.
What's that?
Never take more than a 10 strip.
Never take more than a 10 strip. That's probably solid advice as well. Similar advice follows for mushrooms. Anyway. But I would say that as long as I ask people the same question, and probably the same thing for mushrooms, which is, can you accurately measure? Because if you can accurately measure and do some math, then you'll probably be okay. Otherwise, you could be in trouble. But the same thing happens with your fish food, right? Like if you poured in an entire bag of fish food, like 30-pound bag of fish food into a 200-gallon tank with 2 fish in it, that's not going to end well either. So the same thing applies to acid. It's just much smaller amounts. So I know everybody has their own opinion about it, but that's mine. Like if you can measure and you can do some math, it's just a simple, like you can Google it. You don't even have to like calculate anything yourself other than here's this much water, right? And if you really don't want to fuck it up, you can always just like calculate it out and then put in half as much as you think you're supposed to and see what happens. So I definitely think that there are multiple ways of going about using it. But if you're one of those guys that's just going to pop off the cap and be like, looks about good, then you might have problems. You know what I'm saying? Like, so aside from that, I haven't seen any like convincing evidence that, like when used properly will just ruin everything in your system. And that maybe that's just my experience and my own water, but that's just one of the topics that comes up over and over and over again. And I think because it should, people deal with it in different ways. And like we talked about, have different types of water all over the place.
Well, when you talk about that, the first thing that came to mind to me is people don't realize it. pH is the end all be all of life. A human being, if your pH gets off more than 0.2, you die. So think about that with your plants. And I relate plants right to human beings, because if you look on your 1-a-day multivitamin and you look at the ingredients on a nutrient bottle of a good nutrient company, it's the same fucking ingredients. It's the same ingredients, and there's a pH level that somehow our body seems to maintain through the chemistry of our bodies. But I did this when I got a kidney infection, so I learned a lot of stuff. I got scared, and so when you said, what I really check first, pH. All you growers out there, you have to know what the pH is. That is where you get your nutrient lock. If it's off, that's where all these issues start, is when your pH is off. Or in aquaponics, it kills your fish, you know. So, you know, just as that, you know, that's something I just wanted to relate to you newer growers out there, that you can't grow if you don't have a pH pen, okay? Or some way to test the pH and keep that in check, because it all starts there. You can't balance nutrients. You can't get it all right unless the pH is right to start with.
Right. You might be able to grow lettuce for a little.
You gotta make sure too that you, if you are using a pen, that you're calibrating it regularly. You know, the best way to do it, really, at least for aquaponics, is to use the titration or to use a continuous tester. Like Blue Labs makes a good one. I really like the Blue Labs master tester that has the ppms and EC, and I like to do the total ppms and the pH and the temperature, and I put that in my compost tea brewer, and it tells me, you know, I already know what my dosage is, but you know, when I'm adding molasses or how much fish waste, I can make sure that I get it, you know, to, you know, the right, you know, parts per million to total ppm that I want as a nutrient solution, which is about the only time I ever use total ppm. So
yeah, because you do everything individually because it's so delicate.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that in a post earlier too, in the group about a week ago. I think somebody asked about, you know, and I see people post their total hardness level.
Yep. TDS. Yep.
A lot, you know, and it's like, well, you know what? That doesn't really tell us anything. I mean, it tells us that there's stuff there, but what is there sort of matters. And, you know,
how much iron is there?
Yeah.
How much calcium, how much magnesium, how much molybdenum,
what those parts are.
Boron,
So, alrighty. Does anyone else have any other topics? We're getting kind of long.
No, I think that's about it. I have to get going. The kids are back from swimming, so gotta go do the dad stuff.
I got someone waiting on me to got a little meeting after this. So, we'll see you guys next time. Brian Grow, why don't you tell people how to find you?
Check me out on Instagram, BRAYNE_GRO. And you can also check me out on YouTube. Like I said, I just uploaded an update of my garden earlier this week. And then just yesterday, I uploaded the video of my sand filter that I just made, a little prototype. So check those out.
Awesome. Cool. About you, Marty?
Yeah, so AP Meds on both YouTube and Patreon. You know, like we talked about, Steve is going to have dates for the class, both the online class and the class coming up at Ouroboros. So look for those coming out soon. I know a couple of you guys have messaged me about the online class and getting a date set, and so we're definitely going to get that done soon. And we, let's see, besides that, not too much else. The Facebook group is Aquaponic Cannabis Growers, so you can look us up there. We post pretty much everything onto there in terms of updates, articles, information, questions. A lot of the stuff that we talk about on here gets discussed on there as well. And it's a great place that you can search information. So if you want to type in something in the search bar, like spider mites or thrips or anything like that, then you know, it's a great place to look up information that's already been posted in a searchable manner. So that's a great place and resource for you guys out there, and you can post your own stuff and talk to us there. And I think that's about it.
Awesome. What about you, Roger?
Well, I'm always at ilovegrowingmarijuana.com. We do grow support for all kinds of new growers, medical marijuana patients, and I got some of the best genetics on the planet. All of it's based out of Amsterdam. Excellent quality, all the way down to the flower power nutrients that we've been experimenting with and using the last few months, and had great results so far. I've got a bunch of projects that I can't go into right now because I've got a network that I'm getting ready to open up. We've talked about a couple times. And other than that, all I'd be doing is whining about the servers were down for 2 weeks and I'm way behind. On a positive note, I think I might be able to eke out a couple $100 this week to buy the top rail fencing, to use my hoop house fenders I bought to make me a hoop house to start my aquaponic system. And I've got the benders that you can make a 12, a 16, or a 20-foot wide hoop and make it any length you want. You just keep adding 10-foot lengths onto it. So I'm going to start out with I'm going to try to get it done. I think you think a 10 by 20 would be a nice little hoop house to start an aquaponic system in there?
Yeah, because you can always extend on the one side, you know, or the other.
Yeah. Anywhere you want, yeah.
So, caterpillar stuff.
I was even thinking about just making 10 by 20s, and so I could have different crops in each one. Just keep it like that.
Cool.
System each time.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. You got me hooked. You got me hooked. You know.
Awesome. Well, if you guys can find me at potentponics.com, email me at potentponics@gmail.com, potentponics on YouTube. Check us out, potentponics on SoundCloud if you're interested in just listening to the audio version of the episodes. And I think that's it. Oh, Ouroboros. Shout out to Ouroboros Farms. And big thanks to Do Grow Show. We've been coordinating a little bit with some of the guests and stuff. Those guys are awesome. So big shout out to them. Thank you guys again. And yeah, check out Ouroboros as well, ouroborosfarms.com. I teach the cannabis class out there and the medicinal herb class. They also have lots of other cool classes. Check it out. They got all kinds of cool stuff going on out there now. So, thanks a lot, everybody. And we'll see you guys on Monday for the news show. Have a good one. Oh, for those of you guys that don't know, we have a new show that's called Last Week in Cannabis. We do on Mondays now. It's a really in-depth news show. So yeah, please join us for that as well. Thanks a lot and have a good one.